Chapter 1 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 1. What Happened at a South Carolina Hotel. The golden gleams of the sun, setting in a bank of purple clouds in the west, bathed in a pleasant glow of light the green shores and clear waters of the noble Savannah. A ferry boat had just touched the left bank of the river, and from it disembarked a horseman who, after paying the fare, turned his beast's head to the eastward and rode rapidly along the smooth sandy road which left the stream at nearly a right angle. The rider was a young man on the sunny side of 30, possessing a well-formed frame and good features. His hair was dark, as was the heavy beard that covered the lower part of his face. His dress, for he wore a rebel military suit, indicated that he was an aide upon the staff of a general officer with the rank of captain. He bestrode a stout-limbed, handsome steed, which was flecked with foam and breathed heavily, indicating that the horseman had pushed his animal vigorously. "At last, on Carolina soil," said the rider to himself, in a meditative tone. 10 years is a long time, and it brings many changes. The old house must be within 10 miles of this very spot. And my father, good old soul, I wonder if he is still alive. 3 years since I've had a word from him. And Ralph Montague. Ah, my heart grows impatient at the sound of that hated name. I have a father's injuries and a brother's death to avenge, and the foul wrongs of years to right. Help me, kind Nemesis, yet a little while. The hour of vengeance draweth nigh. Shall I turn aside and seek the mansion of my father? No, I dare not. First I must discharge this important business I am commissioned with, and then, then, on, Dolph!" And the young man plunged the spurs into his horse's flanks and galloped hurriedly along the dry, sandy road to the eastward. In 20 minutes he drew rein before a small wayside inn. The building had a very uninviting aspect, and it is doubtful whether a passer-by would have suspected the character of the house had not a dilapidated signboard, which creaked in the evening breeze, announced that there could be found entertainment for man and beast. A low porch with a rickety floor ran along in front of the inn, and seated on this, in chairs that had seen happier days, were 4 rebel soldiers. The host, a lame man with a club foot, stood leaning against the doorpost, smoking a clay pipe, while several tow-headed children gamboled about the adjacent woodpile. "How d'ye do, Captain?" said the host, limping out to the stranger, while the rebel soldiers rose and touched their caps. "All right, my good fellow," replied the captain, in a calm, pleasant tone. "Can I get a bit for myself, and some grain for my horse?" "Do the best I can for ye," said the host. "But ye cavalry chaps have purty nigh cleaned us out round hyar, specially since Hampton's men have been sent hyar to patrol the river. Suppose it are old Sherman's fault, however, durn his Yankee picter. Get of, Captain, and I'll have Molly get you somethin' ter eat, and I can guv the horse a bit of corn arter he cools off a little." The captain dismounted and handed the bridle to the host, who in turn called a servant, who led the horse around to the shanty designated a barn. The captain slipped a silver dime into the servant's hand to assure attention to his beast, and after shaking the dust from his clothes and performing his ablutions, he stepped up to the bar and said, "Well, host, riding is dry work. What do you have to drink?" "Wall," said the worthy landlord, with a sort of asthmatic sigh, "times hain't as they used to was. For this unfortunate war broke out, there were no landlord this side of Savannah, up ter Augusta, that could answer sich a question in a more gratifying manner than I. I could then git ye up a rum punch, or a whiskey toddy, or a gin sling, or a mint in the wagon, or a lamb's tail. But them golly days are no war. The best we can do now are a leetle tanglefoot. 'Tain't the best nor the wust, but right far. Will you try it?" "Yes, set out the bottle." While the host was getting the huge black bottle down and rinsing out some glasses, the captain stepped to the door and said to the Confederate soldiers on the porch, "Come in, boys, and try some tanglefoot." The cavalrymen, for such they were, got up without waiting for a second invitation, and flocked around the dirty counter in a body. "Now, boys," said the captain, as he raised his glass to his lips, "here's a toast. Confusion to Sherman and his Yankees." "Hip, hip, hurrah!" yelled the soldiers. Then they opened their thirsty mouths, and with a single toss they swallowed down the raw whiskey and smacked their lips. "Can't you tell us your name, Captain?" spoke up one of the soldiers, whose straps indicated a lieutenant. "You're a bully good feller, and I want ter know what to call ye if we happen ter meet agin, as I hope we may 100 times." "There's nothin' in a name, sir," replied the captain gaily, as he slapped the lieutenant jocularly on the shoulders, "but I have no objections to telling you. Only you must first tell me yours. How do I know but you are some of Sherman's scouts, prowling around on this side of the river, and would gobble me up?" "Ha, ha, ha!" laughed the crowd in a great good humor. "Wall," replied the lieutenant, "I am Lieutenant Gossam, of Wade Hampton's cavalry brigade, and these are 4 of my men." And he continued with a guffaw, "My horse's name, which are kicking up his heels out thar in the pasture, is Creamy. And I am Captain Maurice Hoffman, at your service, aide on the staff of General Hardee. And as for my horse, his name is Adolphus, called Dolph for short." The crowd again laughed at this sally, and then the host announced that the captain's supper was ready. The meal, which consisted of a few slices of cold pork, cornbread, and rye coffee, was soon dispatched. "Now," said Captain Huffman to the host, "my business is important, and I shall be obliged to travel most of the night. I desire therefore to lie down for a couple of hours to get a little rest, as I have been on my horse since daybreak. I wish you to call me at 10 o'clock precisely. The moon will be up by that time, and I can pursue my way with ease." "'Zactly, Captain," replied the host. "I will have a room fixed for you in 10 minutes. Meantime, I will take a look at my horse," said the captain, who walked out to the stable. He found that the servant had rubbed the animal down nicely, and was just giving him a measure of corn and some hay. This servant man was a queer-looking fellow. He was a dried-up, withered man, of at least 50 years of age, with pinched features and shaggy, bushy hair, and keen gray eyes. He was deformed, having a hump upon his back, which rose from between his shoulders like a knapsack. His body was short, his head large, and his legs and arms long, slender, and muscular. His name was Benjamin Manx, and he had grown gray in the service of an adjoining planter, who, having died a year previous, Benjamin had hired himself out to the host of the inn. Benjamin Manx was attending to the horse, guided in his operations by the dim rays of an old lantern. "I shall want my horse saddled for me at exactly 10 o'clock," said the captain. "Ye can have him, captain," said the man, who kept eyeing the officer very closely, just as he had done when he first saw him. "What do you watch me so for?" demanded the captain, abruptly turning his eyes upon the humpback. Manx started, but recovered his composure, and said in a respectful tone, "Nothin', sir. Only thought I'd seed you afore." "Well, that's probable. What of it?" "Oh, nothin'. 'Spect you have forgotten me, though." "No. Don't think I ever saw you." "Didn't ye never fall inter the creek down nigh ol' Higgins' place, nigh a dozen year ago? Who pulled ye out just as you were a sinkin' the third time?" The captain gave an impatient gesture of the hand. He evidently had brought to his recollection something unpleasant. "You are entirely mistaken," said the captain. "You mistake me for some one else." "Wall," said the man, "it are lucky for ye that the old boss in thar don't recollect ye, or them gay soldiers would soon put your light out. Old Ben are troubled with many infirmities, the Lord knows. He has a mountain to tote about on his back, but 'tain't a pack o' sins. That's suthin' to be proud o' anyhow. But he has a keen eye and a good memory. Can't fool this chap, captain, for I'll call ye captain, since you say you are sich. 10 years are a scrumptious long time, and the air of furrin cadentries makes a heap o' change in a mortal's 'pearance. 'Sides, a chick o' 15 hain't to be 'spected to resemble a man o' 30 or sich. But ye were kind to old Ben years ago, and his memory's big as a mountain. I'll be mum as a clam, captain." "Benjamin Manx," said the captain in a solemn tone, "you are talking too much. I see by your remarks that you have penetrated my true character, and that you really recognize me. You say you will not expose me. I will trust you, for I well know the reputation you always bore for honesty and integrity. If you do, however, betray me, your life will not be worth a straw. I'll shoot you as I would shoot a dog. Will you remember this, sir?" "No, sir. I will forget it, 'cause 'tain't like yer used to talk to me years ago, and ye orter not threaten an old man like me that has nigh 1 foot in the grave already. But ye can trust me for your life." "That is so, Ben," said the captain in a milder tone. "Give me your hand. It is the hand of an honest man, and by the powers, it is a scarce article nowadays. But what of my father? Is he alive?" "Yes." "Lives he at the old place?" "Still thar, but growin' old, George." "And Montague," continued the captain, in a voice that was husky despite the effort the speaker made to appear calm. "Ralph Montague are a colonel in the army now. Are up ter Augusta, I b'lieve." "Uh-oh!" exclaimed the young man. "I shall soon have my revenge. God grant me luck a little longer." "There's still ill will, then, atween your families, eh?" "Ill will! Heavens, how feeble is language!" said the captain. "But we must not talk thus. It is imprudent. Call me At 10 o'clock and have Dolph ready. Be silent." And the captain strode from the stable. "Silent as death," said the hunchback, as he returned to his partially finished work, and then he muttered in a low tone, "I declar, he has growed handsome. My eyes, Colonel Montague had better look out. Wonder whar the captain's going." A dark figure glided from the shadow of the barn. It was Lieutenant Gossam. End of Chapter 1. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 2 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 2. The Rebs Suspicious. Old Ben Performs. Half an hour after, the 4 rebel soldiers stood in the shade of a tree a few rods from the house, engaged in an earnest conversation. "I'll bet the best fighting cock in the parish," said the lieutenant in an undertone, "that this captain are a spy or something of that sort. You are bent on some mischief, I know." "Pshaw," said a tall, lean soldier with a face like a hatchet and whose pants were decidedly short at both ends. "He ain't a Yank." "How do you know, Sam?" "'Cause the Yanks are all fired, stingy fellers. Suppose a Yank would go ter treatin' a hull crowd ter Tanglefoot." "Bah! That's a blinder. So are his gray uniform. Don't believe he are a aid o' Hardy," said the lieutenant. "Besides, didn't old Ben Max know him?" "Ye heard what they two said, hey?" "Course I did. Ben told him that it was lucky that none o' us knew this captain, or we'd put his light out." "What's that mean? That he are our bunny fighty friend?" "No, sirree. It means that he are a spy. I bet he has documents of Valley about him somewhere. Maybe he has letters from Sherman to somebody or such. I'll tell ye, boys, we must have holt of them, if he has any such fixin's." "That's so," responded the others, now beginning to see things in a clearer light. "'Sides," continued Lieutenant Gosham in a chuckling tone, "he seems flush, and maybe we can help ourselves to something of Valley. Of course, we shall confiscate whatever effects the fellow has, if he's a spy." "And hang him into the bargain," said Sam. "It are all allowable, sartin," returned the lieutenant. "We must call old Ben out hyar and make him tell us the hull truth. Then we can act accordin' ter the evidence and the facts you sees. And if he hain't all clar and straight, why, we'll swing this gay captain in a double jiffy." If the worthy lieutenant had been able to see everything that was occurring about him, he would have noticed the veritable humpback about whom he was conversing, at that very moment kneeling behind a blackberry bush, not 10 feet distant, with eyes and ears wide open. Ben had discovered something suspicious, as he thought, in the conduct of the 4 rebels shortly after the captain had retired to his room, and he kept an eye on their movements. So when they walked down the road, he followed them on the other side of the fence, and thus overheard their conversation. "Phew! There's a row brewing, sure," he muttered, as he withdrew with all speed and caution from the vicinity of the plotters, and hastened toward the house. "The captain must have 'mediate notice of this hyar, and if he'll take the advice o' a man of my years, he'll decamp in a hurry. That Gosham's a powerful mean feller, and wouldn't stop for doing nothing wicked." It did not occupy much time for old Ben to reach the inn. He crept softly upstairs and tapped gently at the captain's door. No response. All was still. Another tap, this time louder than before. "Who's there?" "It are me." "Who's me?" "Me, old Ben," said he. "Uh-oh." "I forgot," said the captain, opening the door and standing dressed before Ben, for he had thrown himself on the bed without removing his clothes. 10 o'clock, is it? You are prompt, and I thank you. Seemed mighty short 2 hours, though." "Hist! Don't speak so loud," said Ben, with an impressive gesture. "Why not, pray tell?" laughed the captain. "Thar's danger. 'Tain't 10 o'clock either." "Not 10? Then why'd you call me?" "Ter warn you." "Warn me? Speak out, man. You're talking in riddles." "Them sojers overheard us talking in the barn, and they hev suspicious about ye, and are a-goin' to arrest ye for a spy." Said the captain in an anxious tone. "And you have come to warn me? Thank you, Ben. I'll remember this. Ye must clar out ter once. Run from these 4 rebels? Bah! But they said ye had valuable papers 'long with ye, and they mout get 'em. For ef they put a bullet through ye, I 'spect ye'd keel over 'bout as quick as old Ben hisself, for all ye are stout and handsome." "Valuable papers," said the captain, while his face turned slightly pale for an instant. "I couldn't afford to lose them, if I had any such, that is." "They'll be here soon, George." "Stop calling me George," interrupted the captain. "My name, you know, is Captain Maurice Hoffman." "Dang it, I forgot. So it is," said the humpback with an air of innocence. By this time the captain had gathered up his things hastily, and examining his weapons, he stood ready to depart. "Now do ye go down ter the barn and saddle your horse, and put just as fast as you can, and I'll try and dumfoodle these here fellers in some sort of way till you get a start. Goodbye, Ben." The men shook hands and separated. The captain succeeded in reaching the barn unseen and threw the bridle and saddle upon his horse. He was compelled, however, to move slowly and cautiously, lest he should be discovered. Once or twice, indeed, he suspended operations entirely and went to the door, pistol in hand, to reconnoiter and examine the cause of suspicious sounds. The moment old Ben reached the bar-room, he met Lieutenant Gosham, who called him aside, and the two started down the road. It was happening just as old Manx hoped it would, and the way seemed clear for the captain's escape. "See hyar, old Ben," began the lieutenant. "Who is that feller that stopped hyar tonight?" "Captain Hoffman, sir," promptly replied old Ben. "So he says," chuckled the lieutenant. "But ye know that was only put on. What's his real name?" "Lord bless you, sir. How can an old feller like me know more'n the captain hisself? If he said his name were Hoffman, of course it must be so." "Ye know better now, Ben," said Gosham in a threatening tone. "Don't go to lying to me. I heerd what you and said out thar in the barn." "Well, what of that?" said Ben, with an air of childish innocence. "What of that? Hear the fool talk!" roared the lieutenant, getting angry. "Didn't ye say that you'd knowed him, and that ye pulled him out of the creek a dozen year ago?" "Yes, and his name are Huffman." "And didn't ye say that if we'd knowed who this captain was, we'd put his light out?" "Yes." "What do you mean by that, hey?" "That if ye'd knowed how big a Confederate officer he war, you'd be willin' to serve him in any way. You'd be so proud of him." "Bah! I don't read it that way. You meant we'd kill him." "Kill a Confederate officer? La sakes, no. And you told him you'd be mum as a clam. Sartain. He told me where he was going on our service, and I said I'd be mum 'bout it. And he threatened to shoot you, and he war going to have his revenge on Colonel Montague. See hyah, said Ben, with a wise and knowing look. There's no use of you trying to skeer me. I wa'n't born in the woods to be skeert by an owl. If I know anything more about this here Confederate officer than you'uns does, why, it are my good luck, and it's just none of your business. Ain't a good loyal officer as good a right to travel in this here state of South Carolina as anybody else? Yes, if he are loyal to our cause, said the lieutenant. But dog me, that's what hain't so clar about this yar chap. What do you mean? Asked Ben. Why, that we more'n half suspect this feller's a spy. Spy? Maurice Huffman a spy? Lord, they'll be calling me a witch the next thing, I reckon, or handsome. We believe he's important documents on him. Documents? What's them? Treasonable papers. Uh-oh, said old Ben in an apparent fright. Are that so? O' course. And now, as ye are a friend of the cause, ye must tell us all ye know about him. Sartin. Then go ahead. I don't know nothing more'n you'uns, 'cept what the man told me himself. What was that? Well, began old Ben with as honest a face as ever graced a human being, ye know I have been down ter Savannah considerable often of late, and I see General Hardee thar many a time. So when I see this yar fellow, I began to try and recollect whar I'd seen him. Purty soon I knowed that he war one of Hardee's staff, and I talked up to him about a spree he had one night when I might have told on him and got him into trouble, and he got mad, as you seed, and threatened to shoot me. Stop! What's that? Interrupted the lieutenant. They all listened, and the rebel Sam declared someone was leaving the inn on horseback. The host, who had been let into the secret suspicions of the rebels, now came running down the road as fast as his club foot would let him, crying out, Gosham! Gosham! Char, what's the matter? The feller is putting off. On his horse? Yes, I watched the stairs, but he had come down afore, or got out of the winder, and he has just rode out of the gate. The clatter of the horse's feet in the distance was now plainly heard, and the rebels grew much excited. Catch the horses, boys, cried the lieutenant, and we'll put arter him. His running are sure proof agin him. The men sprung over the fence after the horses, and the humpback followed, or rather led the way, for his long, slim legs carried him rods in advance of the others. As he approached a horse, he managed very adroitly to prick it with his knife in such a manner that he soon had all the animals prancing and snorting about the field, as wild as young colts. The result was that 15 minutes of valuable time were lost, and the beasts could not be caught until a measure of corn was brought from the barn, by which they were seduced within reach of the bridle. At last they were all saddled and bridled, and the 4 troopers mounted in hot haste, and led by the valiant lieutenant, galloped like a tornado up the road after the fugitive captain. The humpback watched their retreating forms in the increasing moonlight that was just flowing over the tops of the trees until they faded in the distance. He then entered the inn and crawled to his quarters, muttering to himself. He had 20 minutes the start, and a good hoss. I hope he'll get clar, though the Rebs are hard riders. "Well, I did the best I could." "That you did, honest old humpback." End of chapter 2. Recording by John Brandon.
Chapter 3 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colleen McMahon. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 3. A Midnight Ride, Rough Work and Sharp. Maurice Hoffman was engaged in a new business for him, fleeing from an enemy. But there were powerful inducements that urged him to this course, ignominious as it might appear at first glance. And among the various motives that operated in producing the decision to fly, that of fear of personal harm had no place. Once in the road, he gave his noble horse the spur and flew on toward the east with the speed of the wind. 2 miles were quickly traveled. He drew rein to let his horse breathe and to listen. The moon now was fairly up and gave considerable light, although partially obscured by floating clouds in the sky. There was a delicious coolness in the air that refreshed and invigorated him. He rose in his stirrups and turned his ear in the direction of the inn. Not a sound disturbed the solemn quiet that reigned over the country, soon to be broken by the victorious tramp of Sherman's conquering legions. Ah, what was that? He listens again. The sound is very faint. It increases. It is the clatter of iron hoofs. He is pursued. No, the noise is right ahead. Cavalry in front of him. It must be some of Hampton's men, he said to himself, and I'm not particularly anxious to meet them. I'll just ride into this gully among the trees till they go by. I hope they'll pass soon, for it would be dangerous to delay too long. I'm unfortunate. He turned his horse's head and rode a short distance up the gully, until the shadow of the trees and the bushes concealed him from the road. The dragoons were approaching at a gentle trot, and after the lapse of 5 minutes, the captain had the pleasure of seeing the troop, that consisted of 6 men, ride past the gully and down the road. As their tramp echoed more faintly, he rode down the gully and turned up the highway. He had lost 10 minutes by this delay, and he now found that it was likely to prove a very disastrous occurrence for him. Shouts in the distance, and the noise of men riding swiftly and furiously up the road came to his ears on the night breeze. His pursuers from the inn were upon him. No doubt the 6 dragoons who had just passed would join in the pursuit. Ah, why not turn into the gully again, until they had all rode by up the road? Happy thought, but it came too late. His enemies have caught sight of him. They redouble their cries and speed. 10 men are after him, coming on like 10 demons. He gave his horse the spur and rein, and off the gallant beast bounded. "Hold on, Captain Hoffman," cried the voice of the lieutenant. "We're coming. Show your face, you Yankee spy, coward." The captain's blood boiled within him at these taunts. Once he drew rein, almost determined to turn and face his pursuers, rather than to endure their insults. But the importance of his mission restrained him from committing so rash an act, and he held his way. "Hurry up, boys," cried the rebel Sam, who was a length in advance of the others. "We're almost on 'em. Let us give this cowardly Yank such a basting as he'll not soon forget. How do you like traveling in South Carolina, you craven-hearted clock peddler? We'll send you to Andersonville." Flesh and blood could endure no more. This last taunt seemed too much for the phlegm of even Maurice Hoffman, or the importance of his mission. Andersonville, reeking with the blood of patriots, whose only crime was defending their country with their lives, crowded with the starved and dead and dying soldiers of the Republic, who were murdered by hundreds in the most fiendish and infernal manner. Should the man live who boasted of this? "I'll send you to your death, villain," retorted the captain, in a voice that rung out stern and defiant as he turned and discharged his revolver twice among the pursuers. Justice directed the first bullet, for it crashed like lightning straight through the forehead of the brutal Sam, who gave a prolonged scream of agony, and throwing up his hands, he reeled in his saddle and fell over to the ground. The second ball disabled the horse of another trooper who was thrown heavily to the earth. "You'll never taunt another man with Andersonville, you wolfish fiend," said Maurice to himself as he rode on as swiftly as before. A shout of rage and defiance was uttered by the rebels as they urged their beasts on more rapidly than ever. The shots of the fugitive set an example to his pursuers, who now began to discharge their weapons at the captain. They were not armed, however, with revolvers, and had only their swords and carbines, and as they had no time to reload, 8 shots were all they could send after the flying horsemen. 6 carbines were fired, none doing injury, except one that gave the horse a slight flesh wound, from which the blood, however, flowed freely. The distance between the two parties remained about the same, and Maurice hoped he might yet outride them, if the remaining 2 shots would prove as futile as those already discharged. Encouraged by this hope, he again turned and fired 2 more shots from his revolver. A cry of pain announced someone hit, but as 8 men still rode after him, he concluded that a wound was the extent of the damage his enemy had received. Crack went a carbine. Maurice felt his horse to be hit, for the dumb animal gave a cry of mortal fear and leaped forward like a flash. Trees, fences, rocks seemed to fly past him with a fearful speed. This lasted for the space of 30 seconds. Then he felt the beast tremble and its speed slacken. It staggered to its fall, and the captain had just time to remove his feet from the stirrups and leap to the ground as the faithful brute plunged and sunk upon the dusty road, writhing in the agonies of death. The captain leaped over the low fence that skirted the road and turned, discharging the 2 remaining barrels of his 6-shooter. A rebel trooper returned the compliment from his carbine. One of the dragoons fell, but the captain was unharmed. The pursuers shouted aloud with exultant cries, and 4 of them urged their beasts over the fence after the captain, who rushed up an avenue which led to a planter's house, standing about 20 rods from the highway. 4 to 1, considerable odds, but the captain, with a dogged resolution, sought for his other revolver in his belt. Terrible discovery, he had lost it. Nothing was now left him but his sword, and this he drew, casting aside the scabbard as a useless encumbrance. A large gate barred the passage of the avenue at its upper end, where it opened into the yard or lawn. The captain sprang over this barrier with the agility of a cat, and the rebels threw themselves from their horses and also attempted the passage. Here was an opportunity for a defense, and so Maurice set himself to work to dispute the passage of his assailants. He was fatigued and panted with the tremendous exertions he had put forth, but the danger and a hope of escape nerved his arms still. The first rebel who seized the gate to climb over received a straight downward swinging blow upon his head that clove him to the chin. 2 others were nearly over, and again the captain was compelled to seek safety in flight. His blood, however, was up. Of 10 pursuers, only 3 remained. It was a struggle for life, yea, as he well knew, for more than life. Before him he saw a broad, smooth sward. Beyond it were trees and shrubs, and then a white mansion that looked so quiet and peaceful in the bright moonlight. There were lights in 1 or 2 of the windows, and some appearance of stir, as if the noise of the firing had roused the inmates. Might there not be help here? Help, pleasant sound to his ears. These devils seek my life or my letters, thought the captain, one precious to me at least, the other precious to my country. These miscreants shall have neither. A truly hospitable welcome to my native state after years of absence. The young captain was now halfway across the lawn, when he turned and cried out in an energetic tone, "Stop, villains! Would you murder me?" "Shut up!" roared the lieutenant. "Surrender, or we'll run you through as if you were a sucking pig." And with this he made a fierce lunge at the young man, which, however, Maurice parried skillfully, and by the same movement opened a vein in Gossom's arm that started the blood in a stream. The others had now come up, and for fear of being surrounded, Captain Hoffman retreated, until he had placed his back against the side of the mansion, when he tightened his grasp upon the handle of his sword and called out defiantly, "Come on then, pirates, robbers, cutthroats. Though you are 3 to 1, I defy you all. Do your worst." "Give him your steel, boys," shouted Lieutenant Gosham, enraged beyond control by the smart of the wound he'd already received. The worthy lieutenant paused a moment to gain breath and to give his two companions a chance to try their skill upon their victim. "If it is my purse you want, take it," said the captain tauntingly. "It's the Yankee blood and treasonable documents we're after," roared the rebel lieutenant as he grasped his sword, preparatory to renewing the attack. "Look out for your own craven blood," retorted the captain as he took one of his adversaries off guard, and with a swift, vigorous thrust drove his keen blade into the man's side, who sunk back, quivering with pain, upon the green grass. The two remaining rebels now beset the captain fiercely and unsparingly. Blow followed blow with such rapidity that Maurice's arm was wholly occupied in self-defense. Already he was wounded in the sword arm. The pain was sharp and sudden, and the captain began to grow discouraged. He felt a rapidly increasing weariness coming over him. At last his adversaries noticed this, and that he began to strike wildly and somewhat at random. "Give it to him! He's nigh played out!" cried the brutal lieutenant as he increased his activity, and literally showered ringing blows upon the captain's feebly resisting parries. "For my part," said his companion, "I think the Yankee has showed mighty good pluck, but we are bound to have the documents." Suddenly a new life seemed to inspire the captain, who pressed his adversaries and gave the last speaker a terrible gash upon the cheek. The move exposed the captain's head, and the lieutenant aimed a tremendous blow straight at the defenseless spot. But, with the rapidity of thought, the captain's sword again interposed, but only to be snapped into a dozen pieces, and the partially intercepted blow fell heavily upon the officer's head. Maurice staggered beneath it, and he felt a faintness stealing over his faculties. He saw the flashing of bright lights and heard the sound of voices, the rough tones of men and the soft accents of women, and then he caught vainly at some imaginary object in the air and sunk in utter unconsciousness upon the ground. End of Chapter 3. Recording by Colleen McMahon. Chapter 4 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Colleen McMahon. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 4. Family Records, Pistols and Coffee. It is now proper, in order that the reader may clearly comprehend the thread of our story, that we should narrate a bit of history, or rather should give a brief account of certain events which occurred in this section of country many years previous to the opening of our tale. There were two fine plantations lying upon the left bank of the Savannah River, and separated but a short distance from each other. These were owned respectively by Henry St. Leger and Ralph Montague, two men of wealth and position. But if these two gentlemen were blessed with the possession of money, they were likewise cursed with that most mischievous of things, a bad temper. Bad tempers are very likely to get their possessors into trouble, and so very naturally these two planters were always at loggerheads. Something was always occurring to stir up and keep in existence an angry spirit, which at last grew to such a pitch that at a horse race in the neighborhood words came to blows, and the two men separated, vowing dire vengeance on each other. St. Leger, who, to tell the truth, was by far the most quarrelsome in disposition, imagined that he had received the worst of this public set-to, and concluded to have his neighbor's life in revenge therefor. So, the next time they met in public, he very deliberately walked up to Ralph Montague and spat in his face. This was a deadly insult, and Montague was furious. He at once sent a challenge to St. Leger, which was exactly what the cunning fellow desired, for it gave him the choice of weapons, and he was a capital pistol shot. So, one fine morning, these two chivalrous men met in a pretty little shady nook on the river bank, with their seconds and surgeons, and popped away at each other. To the astonishment of all present, Montague escaped unhurt, while St. Leger received a bullet through the arm above the elbow, which shattered the bone completely. So badly indeed was the limb crushed, that the surgeons decided upon immediate amputation, and Henry St. Leger was driven home minus his right arm. If he was angry before, he was furious now. He invoked vengeance in the names of all the heathen deities and Roman saints, for St. Leger was a devout Catholic, as he claimed, although his actions sadly belied his profession, upon the head of Montague and his family, and swore with ponderous oaths that he would have ample revenge. Montague, however, although a hasty man, was not one who, if left alone, would nurse his anger and cherish an old grudge. He therefore after a while sent a servant to inquire after the health of his late adversary, to express his regrets at the unfortunate termination of their late duel, and to say that he was anxious for conciliatory measures. St. Leger received this messenger in a summary manner. That is, he ordered him to be kicked from the house, while he himself crawled to a window and called out to the servant in an angry voice, "Express my regrets, you villain, to your master, and tell him I am sorry he did not give me the opportunity to boot him downstairs himself." Of course, self-respect, if nothing else, compelled Montague after this to let his spunky neighbor alone. In due course of time, St. Leger's arm healed, and he directly sent a challenge to his foe, which, however, Montague refused to accept. Thereupon, St. Leger posted him for a coward, and by a course of tantalizing policy, he finally drove Montague into accepting the challenge. They met upon the same spot as before, and with equally strange results. The first fire they both missed, the second both were hit. Montague received his adversary's bullet along the side of his cheek, leaving only a disfiguring scratch, while St. Leger lost his left arm. The unfortunate man was driven home, so overpowered with mortification and rage that a dreadful fever set in, and for weeks his life was despaired of. At last, however, the fury of the disease succumbed to the skill of the attending physicians, and St. Leger became convalescent, and after a while recovered his usual health. He was, however, a helpless cripple, and doomed to pass the remainder of his days in solitude and misery, which he did, nursing his wrath and hatred, and longing and praying for some means of obtaining revenge upon his enemy. St. Leger was a widower, having buried his wife some 2 years previous to his first duel with Montague. He was the father of 2 promising sons, Marcus and George, aged respectively at this time 18 and 16. Marcus the elder was emphatically a chip of the old block, impetuous and vindictive, and he at once took up the quarrel of his father, with all the hasty ardor of youth and hot blood. George, his brother, was of rather a different turn of mind. He was not so fiery nor vindictive, although a boy of much pride and spirit. While Marcus gave his attention chiefly to the plantation, and prided himself on the blood of the horses and cattle on the estate, George devoted himself to study and reading. The father naturally held Marcus in greater esteem, since he saw himself duplicated in the boy, but was also proud of the accomplishments of George, whom he determined to educate for a profession. One day St. Leger was walking in a retired part of his estate, meditating upon the utter inutility of all of his plans for being revenged upon his enemy, when he was startled by the report of a pistol. The sound was so near that he gave an involuntary shudder lest the weapon might have been fired at himself. A hedge separated him from the possessor of the pistol. He stooped down and looked through. He saw his oldest son Marcus busy loading a revolver. The cartridges were soon placed in proper position, and the young man raised the weapon and fired 6 times in rapid succession, each ball splintering a pine board set against a palmetto tree distant some 30 yards. "There," said Marcus in an audible tone. "Old Montague, I wish that board were you. I'd give this whole plantation for such a chance at you." The father was startled and walked rapidly away. His mind was a confusion of thoughts. A new idea had entered his brain, and he was revolving it to see what would come out of it. "Why not?" he soliloquized. "The boy made 6 good shots. With a little practice, he will hit the center every time. And as for pluck, heaven knows he don't lack that. But he might be— No, I won't think it. It was my bad luck. Luck always changes, and this boy may yet set things to rights. Yes, yes, it shall be so. He hates Montague, and he has the same idea in his young mind that agitates my own. By Jove, it shall be thus. Montague, my boy, will revenge the father. Ah, that he will, that he will. It was not long after this that a full understanding was had between the father and son, and the latter at once entered with alacrity into all the projects proposed by the former. He at once procured a choice revolver, and began practicing daily. A master in the use of the sword was also employed, and every means possible brought into requisition, secretly of course, to render Marcus a proficient in the use of both these arms. The result was that in a short time he equaled the master himself. The youth was impetuous, and ardently desired at once to try an issue with Montague, but Henry St. Leger was too wary a man to give his consent. He determined to wait until the boy's manhood should be developed and his muscles should acquire more solidity, strength, and endurance. Marcus chafed under the restraint, but nevertheless was obedient. Meantime, George had progressed with his studies. One day he received a letter from an uncle on his mother's side, who lived in England, urging him to visit them. The result of this letter was that George was sent to England to remain a number of years and to pursue his studies. Henry St. Leger seldom wrote to George, never himself indeed, for the loss of his arms prevented that, only occasionally dictating a letter. But Marcus often wrote, invariably adding as a postscript, "Montague still lives, and I am not content. Keep up your sword and pistol practice, for if I fail, the work is yours." So 5 years passed away. At last, George received, one day, a letter sealed with black. It was addressed in an unknown hand. Greatly agitated, he tore open the envelope and devoured the contents. His face grew pallid, and his hands trembled so that he could hardly hold the letter. After the first burst of grief succeeded a flow of passion, and the usually quiet, reserved student raged like a seething volcano. His roommate at college stood aghast, but finally ventured to ask him the cause of his anger. "My brother is dead, slain in a duel at the hands of a monster. Oh, God, I shall die. My head seems bursting into 1,000 fragments." Then, striking his clenched hand upon his aching forehead, he strode the room like a madman. "Yes, I'll go home by the next steamer." "What will you do?" ventured his companion. "Do? Do?" exclaimed George in a frenzy. "Did you ask me what I should do?" "Yes." "I will do this." And the excited young man bent over, and in a voice husky with the greatness of his anger and low, he hissed rather than spoke, "I'll commit murder. Yes, murder." The passion was too much for his sensitive mind, and with a gasp the youth fell to the floor in a fit. A surgeon was called who bled him, and he was put to bed. A severe attack of brain fever followed, and it was 3 months before George was able to resume his usual pursuits. Meantime, he had received many letters, dictated by his agonizing father, who seemed anxiously to await his son's return. A postscript always was added, "You have a double crime to avenge. Keep up your sword and pistol practice." The letter which had so affected George contained the particulars of the sad affair. It seemed that, instigated by the father, Marcus had insulted Ralph Montague, and found him quite ready to take up the quarrel. In fact, Montague began to suspect the frequent visits of the fencing master to the house of St. Leger, and from other discoveries that he made, he concluded that there would be more trouble shortly. He therefore made up his mind that if he must kill the entire family before he could rest in peace, the sooner he began the work, the better. So he too practiced himself in the use of the sword and pistol, and when young Marcus insulted him, he promptly sent a challenge. The two met, fiery, impetuous youth and calm, reserved middle age. The weapons were pistols. At the first fire, a singular fatality developed itself. Montague was unhurt, and Marcus's right arm dropped shattered at his side. An exclamation of surprise burst from all, and the aged St. Leger, who was present to gloat over the anticipated death of his old enemy, cried aloud in his fury. The young man, however, motioned back those who were about to approach, thinking the affair was over, and cried in a loud tone, "Back, back! It is life or death now. We will settle it forever now." And seizing his revolver in his left hand, he deliberately began walking towards his adversary and discharging his weapon as he advanced. With the same deadly determination, Montague replied, "You will, sir," and he too moved forward. The spectators stood aghast, yet dared not interfere. The last barrel of each revolver was emptied, while the two men were yet 10 feet apart. At the last shot, Montague reeled and fell upon his knee, steadying himself with his hand. A shout of defiance rose to the lips of Marcus, but it never passed them, for with his hand upon his breast, he fell prone to the green sward. The spectators and the surgeons hastened to the relief of the injured men. Marcus was dying, a ball having penetrated the heart, while his adversary was almost insensible and bleeding profusely from several wounds. His injuries, however, although severe and deep, did not prove mortal, and within 6 months he was himself again. Henry St. Leger was almost crazed with grief. He daily visited the green grave of his brave but rash son, and there, on bended knees, he called down imprecations too awful for repetition upon the house and family of Ralph Montague, and then he dictated fierce and angry letters to his remaining son in England. "Come home, George, and bring your pistol with you," was their burden. These letters had a powerful influence over the mind of George St. Leger. From a frank, open-hearted, joyous youth, full of life and the vivacity of early manhood, he became a gloomy, misanthropic being, and seemed to have given up his naturally strong powers of mind entirely to the laying of plans for revenge. He now seemed to hate Montague with the combined fury of father and brother. Before he recovered from the illness consequent upon the reception of the terrible news, civil war had broken out in the United States, and when he landed in New York, he found that it was impossible to reach his home, either in person or by letter. His patriotic heart led him to take sides at once with the government, and he tendered his services and was accepted. From an appointment as a lieutenant, he rose soon to be a captain, and was detached as an aide upon the staff of a prominent general. During 4 years of hard service, he had proved his worth in the Great West, and when the legions of the fiery Sherman turned their faces towards the sea, George St. Leger's heart leaped for joy. He would soon reach home and vengeance. About the time the army reached Millen, pivoting upon which it swung around southward and moved in parallel columns to the sea, it became important to send certain communications to either Admiral Dahlgren or General Foster at Beaufort, which lay 70 miles to the left. Captain St. Leger volunteered to undertake the mission, as he knew the country well in his earlier days. So he received his orders, and on the evening of the 5th of December he left the rear of the 15th Corps, and disguised as a rebel cavalry captain, started on his dangerous journey of nearly 100 miles, through a section of country thickly infested with rebels, having adopted the fictitious name of Captain Maurice Hoffman. How he succeeded, the reader knows. End of Chapter 4. Recording by Colleen McMahon.
Chapter 5 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gary Conover, Windham, Maine. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 5. The lieutenant makes a discovery, and so does the captain. "Hold, sir! Would you kill him?" exclaimed an old man as he rushed from the door of the mansion, followed by a half-dozen servants, with lights which threw a fitful glare over the prostrate form of Captain Hoffman, or George St. Leger, as we shall hereafter call the young officer. "Don't you see he is helpless?" "Of course he are," replied Lieutenant Gosham, "and a confounded tough time we have getting the feller into such a desirable condition. He fitteth like a young lion's whelp. Who is he, and why do a dozen men assail one? Continued the old gentleman in an indignant tone. Them questions I'll answer one at a time, Judge Simons, if you have no objections, said the lieutenant. In the first place, there ain't a dozen of us, and if there were, it took the whole of us to have finished him. And in regard to who we are, I have to say he are a spy. A spy? Exclaimed the judge with surprise. Of course, a Yankee spy, and these are valuable documents concealed about his person that we are after. At this juncture, 2 other rebels who had been slightly wounded came up, and the lieutenant continued. Since he are dead, all we have to do is search him and get a hold of them papers. Come, boys, don't let's be wasting any more time. Saying this, the lieutenant was proceeding to examine the person of the young officer. Better see if he is really dead first, suggested the judge. It seems hard to kill and search a man thus. Bah, you don't have the run of such things, Judge, like as we fellers does. What's in the business? He are stone dead, and only a miserable Yankee at that. Come, boys, we'll search him. Speaking thus, the lieutenant thrust his hands first into one pocket of the prostrate man, and then into another, but without making any discoveries. Ugh, he said with a dissatisfied air. Them hain't the spots to search, said one of the rebels. Where then? In his breast, or boots, or some such out-of-the-way place. That's where he'd put 'em if he were a cunning fellow, and I expect he were. Ho-ho, cried the lieutenant as he proceeded to sit upon the advice of his man, and tore open the vest of the captain. Ye are a knowin' feller, Bill. Here they are for certain in his inside pocket. The lieutenant's eyes glistened with joy and satisfaction as he drew from an inner pocket a small package, contained in a buff-colored envelope. The package was securely sealed with 4 large wax seals, upon each of which was stamped the word Hardee in small capital letters. The lieutenant held the package up to the light. Darn it, what does this mean? Here's old Hardee's name on these here seals. Don't see the use of that exactly. Let's see t'other side. And the worthy lieutenant turned the package over. If his wonder was aroused at the impress of Hardee's name upon the seals, his eyes were nearly bursting with astonishment as he gazed upon the face of the envelope. His face wore a sadly bewildered look as he stammered through the writing thereon. It ran thus: To General Beauregard, C.S.A., Charleston. And on one corner, in a smaller hand, was written, Carried by Captain Hoffman of my staff. Pass him without delay. Hardee. What on earth does that mean? Blurted out the captain as he fairly trembled with fright. Mean, sir? Exclaimed the old judge in tones of indignation as he snatched the package from the lieutenant's hands with rapidity. Mean, sir? It means that you miserable, cowardly fool have beset with your brutal squad a bearer of dispatches from General Hardee to Beauregard, and have brutally murdered a loyal Confederate officer in the honorable discharge of his duty. That is what it means. Uh-oh, cried the lieutenant, wringing his hands in despair. It has been an awful mistake. I thought he were a Yankee spy. A Yankee spy? What single thing about the man should induce you to suppose such an absurd thing? Well, talk he had with old Max back to the tavern. A talk, fool. I shall report this terrible crime, and you will be shot for it. Who knows but this delay may cause a total derangement of important plans against the enemy? You fool. This night's work may possibly lose us Savannah. Begone! Quick, sir! Get out of my sight before I set my servants upon you. And the judge stamped fiercely upon the ground. The terrified lieutenant, panic-stricken at what had occurred, and fearful of the consequences, hastily withdrew, and rode off with the rest of his squad at a lightning gallop. "Poor fellow," said the judge sadly as he stooped over the prostrate form of the captain. "He dies young, but in a good cause." A faint groan from the lips of the captain caused a flutter of hope that life was not entirely extinct. So the servants lifted George up tenderly and bore him within the house, and laid him upon a hastily prepared bed. The usual appliances resorted to in such cases were adopted, and in short time consciousness slowly returned to George St. Leger, who looked wonderingly around him. He beheld at his side, and holding his hand and chafing it, a venerable gray-haired man with a genial face and a warm, hospitable manner that favorably impressed him. At the foot of the bed stood a well-preserved lady of some 50 years of age, and at the other side were a couple of servants. When St. Leger opened his eyes and found himself lying in a comfortable bed and thus surrounded, his first movement was one of surprise. "Where am I?" "Among friends? How do you feel?" asked the judge kindly. "Rather confused, sir. That villain gave me a stunning blow with his saber. It knocked me senseless." "You do not show any serious wounds that we can discover," continued the judge. "Nothing, I am confident. The wound which you have bandaged in the arm is slight. This blow in the crown only stunned me, and I shall be well in a day or two at the farthest." "We all hope so, sir, although we feared much worse." "But my papers," said St. Leger, sitting up and thrusting his hand into his breast pocket. "Those fiends did not get them, did they?" "Rest easy, sir. I have the package." "Will you please let me have it?" continued the captain, "for I promised the general that it should only leave me with my life. Until I place it in the proper hands, I should feel easier with it in my pocket." The judge handed him the package. Thanks. You have conferred a great kindness. You need rest, apparently, more than anything else just now. We will withdraw and give you the opportunity to gain it. If you wish anything, ring this bell on the chair. I congratulate you on your marvelous escape." The captain was left alone. A dimly burning lamp, turned down low, shed a soft, mellow light about the small, neat, and well-furnished apartment. A door from the chamber opened into an adjoining sitting-room. This door was ajar, and directly opposite, against the wall of the chamber, hung a large, old-fashioned mirror. The captain's eyes were fastened upon this glass, which reflected a portion of the contents of the sitting-room. From the revelations of this glass, the captain knew that a marble-top stand stood in the center of the sitting-room. Moreover, he knew that upon said stand was burning a bright lamp, and that there sat in a rocking-chair, reading, a young lady, who had a very pretty face, with a well-defined, clearly cut features, a high open forehead, jet-black eyes, and an exquisitely formed mouth. If the glass reflected truly, then he knew she must be in the neighborhood of 18, and was, as usual in the ardent climate of the South, even then a well-developed woman. St. Leger had traveled, and had seen many handsome females, and knew how to appreciate a good-looking girl. But he had never before seen a face that made such an impression upon him. Why it was, he could not tell. It was not mere beauty of features, for handsomer women he had many times seen. But there was some undefinable magnetism in that sweet, pensive face that indicated mischief to the heart of a man, who should be thrown such into the society of its owner. The captain was really not much hurt, and suffered but little pain from the blow upon his head, and was quite comfortable except very much exhausted, and troubled with a confused feeling in his head. So he lay upon the bed, half awake, half asleep, dreaming and fancying and musing. He endeavored to recall this Judge Simons, but he could not. No such man that he could remember lived in the neighborhood when he was a boy, and the house itself seemed unfamiliar to him. This young lady must be the judge's daughter. There was nothing improbable in such a supposition. Indeed, it must be so. The position in which the captain had been lying grew irksome, and so he moved a little and coughed. The fair reader lowered her book and listened. The captain coughed again and cleared his throat. The lady laid down her book, and with the airy lightness of a fawn glided into the room. She approached the couch and leaned over. The captain had closed his eyes when he heard her approaching, and now slowly opened them. "Can I do anything for you, sir?" asked the young lady in a low, sweet voice that sounded in the captain's ears like the caroling of the birds in the forest. "A glass of water, if you please." The water was within easy reach, and the captain's wants were readily supplied. "Thank you," he said, and then continued, "It is so lonesome lying here, and I cannot sleep. Will it be asking too much of you to sit by me for a few moments?" "Certainly not, sir," said the lady. "Only you must not exert yourself too much in talking." "Oh, I must talk. I'd as lief die as be compelled to keep my tongue still," replied the captain. "This is so kind of you all to care for a wounded soldier." "A soldier's life is hard enough and self-sacrificing enough, I'm sure, to merit more than what we are now doing. Your own bitter experience tells you this." "That I have been right roughly used," said George, "I will not deny. If that villainous lieutenant had got the chance, he would have run me through. But I think I did well in getting off no worse, with half a score of lusty cavalrymen hacking and cutting at me. My long training in sword exercise stood me in good stead." "Did I understand the judge to say all right that you are a bearer of dispatches from Hardy to Beauregard?" "Exactly. I was on my way toward Charleston when these thick-headed, overzealous rebels pitched into me." "Rebels?" laughed the young girl. "Then you call yourself and all the rest of us rebels, eh?" "Pretty good for you. Why, upon my word, you are as bad as a Yankee." "Oh, I don't hate the Yankees so dreadfully," returned George, with an attempt to smile. "I have seen too much of them. They are, many of them, first-rate fellows. You can judge for yourself shortly." "What mean you?" "Oh, they'll be along here pretty soon." "You don't mean it? Can they capture Savannah?" "Yes." "And Charleston?" "Yes. But Hardee and Bragg and Beauregard—" "Sherman and his Yankees will whip us all to pieces, I am sure of it. He has 100,000 veterans. We oppose him with, say, 40,000. They are flushed with success, we demoralized by defeat. The result is certain. In a month, Savannah will have fallen, and you will see the boys in blue marching by your very doors on their way north." "You speak discouragingly." "Only the truth. Do these Yankees commit such dreadful atrocities as we often hear of?" "No, they are men. The officers, gentlemen." "Then they won't burn our mansions?" "Don't know. They had us South Carolinians." "Then you are a South Carolinian?" "Yes." "From where?" "Beaufort County." "Why, that is this county." "Yes." "And your name, if I may ask?" "Is Captain Hoffman." "Yes. But I don't know any Hoffmans in the neighborhood." "I've spent the last 10 years in England." That accounts for it. The captain was bewitched with his companion. He felt a strange feeling about the heart, and felt himself wonderfully drawn toward her. Could it be love that had sprang up at first sight? "This is the mansion of Judge Simons, I believe?" "Yes." "Has he resided here long?" asked George. "About 4 years. He moved from Mississippi." "You are his daughter, I presume?" ventured George. "No." And the girl smiled quizzically. "You are mistaken, Captain. My name is not Simons, but I am a niece." "Please tell me what it is," said George coaxingly. "I want to know what to call you when we next meet." "You expect to meet me again, then?" "As sure as I live, I will, kind soul. I like you already. ventured the captain enthusiastically. "You talk too much. It will injure you." "You should be quiet," replied the girl, blushing. "I will tell you my name, and then goodbye till the morning, for we can then talk more if you wish it." "But on the morrow I must depart." "No, you will not. You are not strong enough. The judge expects my father, who was a colonel in Hampton's cavalry, early in the morning. He will himself forward your dispatches to General Beauregard." "Your father? Colonel Beauregard?" exclaimed the captain in a bewildered tone. "And your name? Tell me, dearest." There, I knew you had talked too much. You are feverish already," said the girl with a bewitching smile. "I will send my aunt to you after a while." The name, asked George. "My name is Alice Montague." And the door closed behind her. End chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gary Conover, Windham, Maine. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 6. The captain travels, meets a friend. If ever a man was stupefied with astonishment, that man was Captain St. Leger. The beautiful girl who had just left him was the daughter of his bitterest enemy, the child of the man who had maimed his father for life, slain his own brother, the offspring of the man he had sworn to shoot on sight. St. Leger's mind was lost in a whirl of emotions upon making this astounding discovery, and he actually cursed the ill luck that had thrown the young lady in his pathway. He wished he had never seen her, and yet, having seen her once, he desired to again. And then, too, Ralph Montague, a colonel in the rebel army and a member of Hampton's cavalry brigade, was expected to arrive in the morning. And what would be the consequences? 10 to 1, the captain's true character would be discovered, his dispatches opened, and mischief be to pay generally. "By Jove," said the captain to himself, "things are getting complicated. And the sooner I get away from here, the better for my head, to say nothing of my heart. To be sure, I might shoot the colonel on sight, but then what would become of my dispatches? Can't lose them. Besides, I haven't a revolver nor a sword." For 5 minutes the captain lay in a deep thought. Then he raised himself on his elbow and glanced about the room. When Alice had left the apartment, she had closed the door after her, and was busy reading in the other room. It did not take the captain long to slip off from the couch and draw on his boots, coat, and cap. He found his arm a little stiff, and the top of his head sore, but nothing to affect his usual movements. He now looked out the window. The moon was obscured by passing clouds, but it was by no means very dark. Blame it, it seems rather an ungracious return for their kindness to leave so unceremoniously. But then the circumstances require it, said George to himself. They'd hang me for a spy if I'm detected, and the young lady... Yes, I will. A pencil lay by the table by the side of the lamp. The captain tore out a blank leaf from a book and wrote hastily as follows. Miss Alice, as it is important that Beauregard should receive my dispatches promptly, I have concluded to be off. You will excuse my abrupt departure. If your worthy uncle misses a horse in the morning, let him charge it to the Confederacy. I have a presentiment that Sherman and his Yankees will be here soon. Don't be afraid of them. They won't hurt you. If the Yanks don't shoot me, I'll see you again. Respectfully yours, Morris Hoffman. There, said the captain. They'll know from that the devil hasn't spirited me away, but that I have left my own free will and accord. George left the note and the pencil on the table, and then quietly covered up the pillows to resemble a man sleeping in the bed. He then raised the sash softly and got out of the window. The judge's barn stood a short distance from the house, and thither the captain directed his footsteps. To his gratification, the door was unlocked, and he entered. He found 2 horses in the stalls, one a large bay horse, and the other a small black pony. "That pony, I suppose, belongs to Miss Montague." "Montague, curse the name. Why don't she have some other name? The big horse is doubtless the judge's pet. This sort of work smacks of horse stealing, but I call it only confiscation. I bet old Sherman wouldn't hesitate to take the beast if he were here. Besides, the Rebs killed Dolph, and they owe me another. Dolph, poor Dolph." All the necessary equipment were hanging on a peg by the side of the stall. It did not require much light nor time to saddle and bridle the beast, which was very gentle. St. Leger then led the horse out of the stable and got on him, rode slowly past the house without interruption and down the avenue. Something bright glistened in the dull moonlight upon the ground. The captain drew rein, and then with a chuckle he dismounted, and picked up the revolver they had lost in the hurried race up the lane. "Worth your weight in gold," said the captain, "and 6 good cartridges inside to boot. Most fortunate." The captain was much encouraged at finding his trusty weapon, and remounted the beast. He then continued to ride down the avenue. Suddenly he stopped and looked sharply ahead. A man was standing in the way before him. St. Leger drew his revolver and, cocking it, said in a determined tone, "Who are you, sir?" "Gosh, I thought it were you, George," returned the man. "What, is it you, Ben Manx?" Sartin, Captain. You oughter be able to tell me in the dark. There's no mistaking this here knapsack on my poor back. It air a big pile of fur a small man should be toting around for 50 years or such. But the Lord he thanked. 'Tain't sin. 'Tain't a bundle of sin. What in the world brought you here, Ben?" "To save your honor, George. You allus used to treat old Ben kindly. Never made light of my infirmities, and you knows what the Lord does to them as makes fun of the old and infirm. Sends the bars to eat them up. To be sure, George, there ain't many nary bears round here I ever heard tell on, but 'pears to me that the rebels are wuss than a drove of bars, and so I come to serve you." "How can you help me, Ben?" "Well, it seems you have found means to help yourself, more than I had any reason to hope you would. I really suppose you are dead. According to the lieutenant's story. The villain, where is he now?" "Back to the tavern. He come back there, nigh 2 hours ago or such. My Jupiter, but he are about the worst skilled chap you ever seed. Swore that he'd run you down to the judges and split your head open, and then when he come to search you, he found you warn't no spy, but a bona fide Confederate ossifer, carrying dispatches per Beauregard. And the judge threatened to have him shot. Oh, my. I'd rather have this pack on my poor shoulders so it ain't a bundle of sin than to be in the lieutenant's boots." "How many men come back with him?" 6 came back, but one of them has a bad wound in the head. 3 of the 10 will never do no more shooting." "Why so?" "'Cause you killed him stone dead. I seed him in the road myself. Gosham said you were lying here for dead, and I thought I'd see how it were. For I felt a warm spot for you, ever since I hauled you out of the creek 10 years ago, so I slipped out of the house and put a bridle on the old mare, rode him up to take a reconnaissance, and here I are. I were a notion to give you the mare, but I see you have a much better beast, and I'm so glad you weren't hurt much, and I'm glad you're going to clear out, for it'll be pesky hot about these diggings pretty soon after sun-up in the morning." "Hot? Why, what's up?" "There, bless you, I know you'd wouldn't get wind of it, and so I come clear here to tell you about it. What is it? Speak, quickly. Yes, I'll talk all right smart. My tongue are a little stiff with age, but it'll wag sufficiently fast for most purposes. I ain't altogether certain whether this infirmity in my back are conducive to a fluency of speech or not. Come, Ben, hurry up. Well, then, a chap arrived at the tavern shortly after you left, a-riding a fast hoss, and that he were going to Savannah lickety-jump with news. Old Sherman is turned south and left Auguste out in the cold, and he are retiring down towards Savannah for certain. And what's worse, the whole gang of Hampton's cavalry be rampaging along here soon and help cover the river nigh Savannah. And Colonel Montague with his regiment of horse will be along about daybreak. There, if that ain't news enough for once. Gosh, it are a piling most as big as the hump on my back. But the hump ain't a bundle of sin, thank you. Thank the... Then it's time I was off, said St. Leger. I want to meet this Montague bad enough, heaven knows, but not exactly under these circumstances. I have but one life, and that I can't give except in exchange for his. The colonel are a bad man, that's so, chimed in Ben, but then he's a dreadful nice daughter. 'Tain't a Christian spirit, neither. George, that y'are a nursing again this enemy of yours. Certain he's done yuns and lots of harm, but you mustn't forget that there's always two sides to a story, and I make no manner of doubt that some of the blame has been on both sides. Pity to kill the colonel and leave his daughter an orphan, poor thing. Is her name Alice? Asked the young captain, hurriedly and in a tone that betrayed his anxiety. Say, is her name Alice? Of course. It are just that and a handsomer and better behaved girl there tain't in the whole district. And I'm certain that if you would set eyes on her, you'd forgive the old man all he's done to you just for the sake of the gal. If I were a young man again, and were as good-looking as yourself, and owned the best plantation on the Savannah, you can bet your life that I'd see the daughter through. If the old uns wanted to fight and cut and slash each other, all to pieces, that's their privilege. But it don't follow that the young uns oughter fall to cutting up the same sort of pranks. Not by a jugful. But then, what's the use of saying what an old magpie like myself would do? There ain't a gal inside of the district of Beaufort that would look at such an old beeswax as I are, unless 'twere for the purpose of getting up her larf at my expense. Such a larf, howsomever. Some are good, and some are bad. Some are big, some are little. Some are handsome, and some isn't. This here infirmity on my back are the spilin of my parents. But 'tain't a back of sin. Thank the Lord, 'tain't a back of sin. George St. Leger heard only the first part of this long speech of old Ben Manx, and it set his thoughts to working and his feelings in motion, brought his heart into his mouth. Marry Alice Montague and forget the wrongs her father had done? Never. Be recreant to all the fond expectations that were conceived of him by his own family? No. And yet this Alice Montague was so beautiful. Goodbye, Ben, said St. Leger impatiently, and digging his heels into his horse's flanks, he drove away like an arrow in the starlight without waiting for a reply from old Ben, who shook his head dubiously and muttered to himself, He's as bold as old Scratch himself. Good luck to him. End chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gary Conover, Windham, Maine. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren, Chapter 7. Old Ben prowls around and finds something. Ben Manx was not altogether pleased with St. Leger's rather hurried and unceremonious departure, but sat upon his sorrel nag, apparently in doubt whether to strive to overtake the captain or to return to the inn. Dang the luck, he needn't have put out in such a terrible hurry. Sides, 'twa'n't overly polite in him, seeing how much I have done for him. But then young blood are naturally impetuous and must be allowed for. Gosh, but the old judge will be howling mad in the morning, when he discovers that the felon what he supposed were one of Hardy's messengers has stole his best hoss and put. Who'd thought of seeing George St. Leger turn hoss thief? But only to think of him being in the Union Army and his old father here a true blue secesh. Well, I hopes the youngster will get through safe, though to speak the honest truth, I have mighty serious doubts on that subject. If there weren't so tarnal many rebs lying around loose twixt here and where? George didn't say where he were going. But dang it, I'm certain that Charleston ain't the port he's bound for. More'n likely he's going to Burfoot. Hi-ho, I believe I'll just ride up to the house and take a squint around sorta like. Maybe something might turn up to help the captain, now that he's got off so smart. Ben rode up the lane a little further, till he reached the gate, when he dismounted and hitched his nag to the fence. He then got over the gate and walked towards the mansion. The moon had sunk behind a bank of clouds that skirted the lower part of the western sky, and the night was now comparatively dark. The mansion was without signs of life, except the faint light that glimmered from the sitting-room window, and from the room which St. Leger had so lately deserted. A gentle breeze rustled among the leaves and branches of the trees. "Hope the boy made a good selection of critters," muttered old Ben, as he walked round the corner of the house towards the sheds in the rear. "For he's a long ride and a tough one afore him. Don't see nothing suspicious about the place. Reckon that the captain will have a couple hours start anyhow. Gosh, what's that? Hope there aren't any dogs here, ya?" Ben stopped and listened to hear something that sounded marvelously like the growl of a dog. "Uh-oh, if there's any of them varmint about, I'll just make myself scarce. Never did like dorgs. Sound, never. Wouldn't make no difference, only that the pesky critters never liked me. 'Spect this here pack on my back makes 'em sort of nervous. Oh, get out! Get out! Gosh." Ben's soliloquy was suddenly interrupted by seeing the outlines of a dark body rushing from a shed directly at him. The old fellow knew it was a pesky dog, and with an exclamation of terror he sprung around ahead and cut across the yard like a flash. And after him went the animal, a good-sized watchdog, with a coat of shaggy yellow hair and a set of marvelously sharp teeth. The dog was quick of foot, and in a twinkling his jaws fastened upon what he supposed to be Ben's leg. But Ben wore a size of breeches about 3 sizes too large in circumference for his legs. Consequently, the dog's teeth came furiously together, just grazing Ben's flesh, but taking in a good mouthful of southern shoddy. The result of this attack was to throw Ben flat on his face while the dog rolled over him, the material of Ben's breeches tearing out like brown paper. "Gosh," cried the humpback, "got fooled that time, old dog, didn't you?" Up scrambled Ben, and back bounced the dog. A few feet from Ben stood a small tree with wide-spreading branches which came within some 6 or 8 feet of the ground. Towards this the old fellow ran, and as if it might afford shelter. As he reached the tree and leaped into the air to catch the branch, the dog was up to that time and snapped at him again, this time with better luck, for his sharp teeth pierced the old man's flesh so keenly that he gave a roar of pain. Ben missed the branch and dropped to the ground. The old fellow was now thoroughly mad, and turning about he gave the dog a vigorous kick that sent the beast howling across the yard. At this juncture of affairs, a door opened and a couple of servants stepped out. Ben didn't wait to see more, but started at full speed for his horse. This move on his part determined the servants, who rushed hastily after him, shouting like troopers, while the dog, encouraged, barked louder than ever and joined in the pursuit. Ben jumped the gate like a squirrel, and unhitching the horse, he threw his light body astride the animal and rode furiously down the avenue. "Ha-ha!" he cried joyfully. "A miss are as good as a mile any day. Mighty luck escaped, too. Dang that dog, he gave me a very aggravating nip that time. Declare if my skin ain't getting tender as a baby's. Now I'll bet the judge will think it were me that stole his hoss. That'll let the captain out of the scrape sartin. Gosh, I believe I have the strategy of a general. Pity I hadn't command of Hood's army. Bet I wouldn't have trotted the boys away over to Nashville and let Sherman go rampaging all over Georgie. No, sir. I'd have stuck to this hare track and a kid entry closer than a burr to a schoolboy's trousers. Gosh, I'd buy me the best horse in the whole country. I'd saddle him and bridle him and buy a sword as long as my arm, and I'd drive things around here like a Yankee grandmother would turn the spinning wheel. I'd go in for rough and tumble fighting, for shooting and bayoneting and cutting and slashing. Them's the sort of things that counts up like making 10 strikes when a fellow's playing 10 pins. I believes in studying strategy on Sunday and fighting like thunder the rest of the week. That's what they say old Grant does, and I make no doubt that's why he wills us so. Bully for Captain St. Leger, and may he arrive safely to the end of his journey, and I hope the judge won't feel bad about the loss of his best horse. Hold, madman! Would you run us all down? Cried a stout voice. You ride like a centaur. Ben Manx came to a stop to find himself in the midst of a group of a dozen horsemen who drew rein and surrounded him. Madman? That ain't me, as I knows on, said the old fellow as he peered in the faces of the cavalry, although it was too dark to recognize features or colors. Howsomedever, I expect I might most as well be outright mad to once for all the good my wits does me. Well, sir, continued the first speaker, who appeared to be the leader of the squad, if you're not a madman, why do you ride so like one? You dash along at the top of your speed on a dark night as though Satan himself were after you. Where are you going? Going, huh? Home? Where's that, pray tell? Down to Bill Askin's tavern. And what's your name? Name? It's Benjamin Manx. You ought to know me, Colonel. Knowed you these here a dozen years. Shouldn't think you'd ever forget me after you had once sot eyes on me. Reckon you'd know me if it were daylight, 'cause I'm the handsomest feller in the district. Got the doggonest knapsack on my back you ever seed. 'Tain't a load of sin, though, Colonel. Thank the Lord for that. Oh, this is old Manx, is it? Returned the man who had been styled Colonel. Then you are the very chap we want to see. Oh, is it possible? What an honor, sir, returned Ben, not, however, in the steadiest tones. I hope it's to tell me good news of the skedaddling of the Yankees, and if 'twarn't for the pack on my shoulders, I'd been a-shooting and sticking to them myself. Come, no palaver, said the colonel, in a decided tone. We want to know why you are abroad at this time of the night. My boss, Bill Haskins at the tavern, sent me over. No, don't tell me any yarns, interrupted the colonel. You can't fool us in that way. We have just come from the tavern, and your boss don't know where you are, though he was ready to wager his head that you would put off to look after your Yankee friend. Yankee friend? Exclaimed old Ben innocently. Gosh, I don't know I had any friends among the pesky Yankees. don't know what should make him friendly toward me. Ain't no very attractive pints about me, except this hump on my shoulders, which ain't overly inviting in appearance, but then, thank the Lord, 'tain't a pack of—" Come, interrupted the colonel. If you have no sin in your pack, it's more than you can say of your heart, unless you lie like a Mexican. We know all about your pranks tonight. You have aided and abetted in the escape of a dangerous Yankee, who bore with him a very important document. You put him on his guard at the inn, and you have even now come forth to see if you could not aid him further. Who in the world can you be talking about? Asked Ben. Certain that I han't seed no spicious puss in hell round. Can't be that you means Captain Hoffman, what Lieutenant Gosham come nigh killing. Come nigh killing? Didn't he kill him? Ben saw he was too fast and too well informed, and so he moderated his tone a trifle and said, Can't say, sir. Gosham said he killed him, and that's all I knows on the subject. 'Tain't likely a man would live with his head split open. Well, sir, this Hoffman is the Yankee we are after, for he is a Yankee. Law sakes, no, cried Ben. Can't be possible. Yet, if you says it, it don't become me to deny it. But Gosham declared that he had seen Hoffman's dispatches and that it were directed to General Beauregard down to Charleston way. It appears to me, no matter how it appears to you, sir, the address was to deceive such as you. Turn your horse's head and return with us to Judge Simon's, where I understand this precious Yankee was knocked on the head. Well, if you desires my company, Colonel Montague, you are welcome to it, I'm sure. Anything to serve the good cause. Laws mercy, who'd thought that the young captain were a Yankee spy? He did fool us, certain, and if I give him anything a lift, it were because I thought he were a genuine Confed, certain. Oh my, the deceitfulness of human nature. It are distressing to think on it. Such a smooth-faced feller to soft-soap us, and make believe he were all hunky-dory. But 'tain't Christian heap views on him now, for according to reports, and he done fur with a cracked skull. Why, I'm just aching to see you get hold of the papers that he had, Colonel. Maybe it'll be the saving of all of our lives. Who knows? All these deceitful, bloody Yankees. Now, old fellow, just put a muzzle on your mouth, and don't open it again until you are requested to speak, said Colonel Montague, for he was the speaker. If I am not greatly mistaken, at least one half of your talk thus far has been a pack of lies. 'Tain't a pack of sin, though, Colonel, broke in Ben. Remember that, Colonel. Remember that, and the Lord be thanked for it, too. See here, cried Montague, didn't I tell you to keep still, you old chatterbox, you? Learn to obey orders, or I'll teach you better manners in a hurry. I've half a mind to run you through now, you old scarecrow. And the colonel whipped out his sword and brandished it ominously over old Ben's head. Hold on, for mercy's sake, cried old Max, in a tremor of fright, apparently. There ain't nothing between us. I'll agree to everything you says. Don't hit me. Don't. Oh. Shut up and take that, roared the colonel, as he let the side of his sword fall heavily across the old fellow's hump between his shoulders. The weapon glanced off and struck sharply across the rump of the old sorrel nag that Ben bestrode. This was too much for the dignity of the venerable beast, who kicked furiously out and snorted, plunged. The horse's feet struck against the ribs of a cavalry steed, which also gave a furious kick, the latter kick coming pretty severely against the colonel's beast. Old Ben also gave the colonel's horse a sly cut with his whip that sent the spirited animal dancing up the road several rods and nearly unhorsed the officer. Old Ben's nag, now excited, only needed the loosening of the reins to travel. Ben lit up on the bit and touched the animal's shoulders with his whip, and off they darted with the speed of the wind. End chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gary Conover, Windham, Maine. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren, Chapter 8. The Colonel visits and meditates. "Confound that old monster," ejaculated Colonel Montague as soon as he could get his horse again under control. "He's off like a balloon. It's scarcely worthwhile, however, to pursue him, for the game's not worth the powder. He can't do any mischief, as I see, and when we get through this matter of the dispatches, we may look after old Manx. He's half a fool, anyway. Come, men, forward!" The troop fell into line and trotted on to the house of Judge Simons. As they had but half a mile to go, their destination was soon reached, and they rode up the broad avenue at a lively gait. The gray tints were already streaking the east, betokening the break of day, and the judge's household were astir. Indeed, so much had they been disturbed during the night that none of the family or servants had slept very soundly. The clatter of horses' hoofs brought the gray-headed judge out on the lawn, where he gave his brother-in-law, Colonel Montague, a hearty welcome. "Pretty early, Colonel. Didn't look for you yet into at least 2 hours, but your horses are all in the foam. You have ridden hard. Anything so very urgent? And I expected at least 1 or 2 companies of your command with you, but I see less than 20 men. What's up?" "Matter enough. We have had a rough ride and a long one. We got information that a Yankee messenger had left Sherman's army and was riding across the country with dispatches for Foster at Beaufort. And as I was intending to move this way anyhow, the general ordered me to take a company of my cavalry and try to capture the fellow. We got in his track about 10 miles beyond the ferry, but lost him. I then divided my command, sent part along the right bank of the Savannah, with orders to cross below at Bud's Ferry, while a second detachment are leading out well to the left of us. If we had known, however, that Providence was about to step in so fortunately to our aid, we might have spared our horses a little." "A Yankee messenger," returned the judge. "Then I hope you will catch him. These Yankees are most pestilential fellows, and are a little too shrewd for any use. Do you think you will overtake them?" "Overtake him? Why, isn't he here now?" "Here? Who? The Yankee, you mean?" "Yes." "Why, no Yankee. What? Has that Gossam deceived me?" "Oh, you mean the young captain that Gossam ran down here last night?" "Of course. He is the one we're after. He is a Yankee." "Yes?" "Yes, why not? Can you have made the same error that Gossam made?" "What was that?" "To mistake Hardee's messenger for Sherman's." "I have made no mistake. This young man was a Yankee in disguise. He wore a Confederate uniform." "Yes, but his dispatches were addressed to Beauregard at Charleston, for I saw them." "All a sham. The outside envelope was indeed addressed to Beauregard, as they say, but that was a blinder, and I hope soon to convince you. What have you done with the man's body?" "Hope you haven't buried him, for I've been told he was the son of my old enemy, St. Leger." "His youngest son, George. I want to be certain of it." "You astonish me. George St. Leger? To be sure, I never saw him, but I have heard enough about him. A Yankee messenger. You bewilder me. But you haven't buried him, have you?" "Buried him? Do you take me for a heathen?" asked the judge with the greatest surprise. "I should hope not. Why do you ask?" "To suppose me capable of burying a live man." "Alive? Better yet. Gossam is a veritable liar. At first he swore he hadn't seen any such person, but no sooner did he learn that this St. Leger was a genuine Yankee spy Then he declared he had killed him in your dooryard last night. All right, however, I'm glad he is alive. Well, I can't say that I am, returned the judge, now that I've heard your story. What? You don't sympathize with him, eh? Not with him, but I am sorry for you. Sorry for me? I don't understand you. I should think you would congratulate me, rather, on my success, that my chase is over. So I would, if it were true. Unfortunately, it's not the case. Isn't the man here? No. No? When did he leave? During the night. How and where? Where, I can't say. How? He stole my best horse. Do you mean to say that this man who was nearly killed last night got up and stole your horse and rode away? His hurt was very slight. But his dispatches, you have them, surely. No, I thought him one of our men. He stole away during the night and left no trace, except a short note to your daughter, which is of no importance in itself. Well, said Colonel Montague, it strikes me that the fates are against us. Things are badly mixed up, but if the fellow is gone, we must follow, that's all. I hope you have a bit of breakfast for us. Yes, come in. The boys will tend your horses. An hour's delay matters little. The troopers dismounted and led their horses to the rear of the house, where they gave them some hay, meanwhile partaking themselves of a few bits of hardtack, interspersed with fragments of a huge corn cake, which was distributed among them by one of the judge's servants. The colonel and the judge entered the mansion, where a cordial greeting took place between his sister, Mrs. Simons, Alice, and himself. The colonel had not seen his daughter for a fortnight, and testified his love for her by pressing her to his bosom tenderly and covering her fair face with kisses. An hour passed rapidly, and shortly after sunrise the colonel bade adieu to the judge's family and ordered his men to mount and away. Just as he was throwing himself into the saddle, Alice slipped a piece of paper into her father's hand with a request to read it when he was fairly on his way. Then the troop trotted gaily down the avenue and along the highway leading to the east. Wonder what the girl has written. Alice is a queer little piece as ever lived, but a good girl. Yes, a dear good girl, soliloquized the colonel as he rode at the head of his troop. It must be some girlish request she has to make. Can't be new dresses she wants, for two reasons. First, there are none to be had, and secondly, her mind don't run that way. But she is a dear good girl, just like her poor dead mother. My lost Alice. I see you now as in years agone, and your daughter is in the image of your own sweet self. How I wish this dreadful war was over. My poor girl. If the fortunes of war should yet leave you an orphan, how dreadful it would be. But the end is coming. I feel it. If we crush Sherman, we are victorious, and our independence is achieved. If we don't, the game is up, and a Southern Confederacy is a myth. God help the right. Colonel Montague was in a meditative and sober mood, and, by the way, he was of late much given to such turns of mind. He had not been a willing secessionist, his attachments clinging at first tenaciously to the old flag and its hallowed associations. But when his fiery little state cut loose from her moorings in the old government, and state after state followed her lead, Mr. Montague saw that there was little use in holding back longer, and he drifted, rather than went of his own accord, into the ranks of the rebels. He was a man of great courage and energy, and raised at once a company of cavalry, and was soon promoted by successive steps to the colonelcy of his regiment. Of late, Colonel Montague had begun to see with the shrewd eye of a businessman that the success of the rebellion was impossible, that the powerful arm of the old government would soon sway its scepter again over the undivided country. This being his firm belief, his zeal had greatly abated in the rebel cause. and as he was loath to join the rebellion at first, so now he was ready to leave its tottering fortunes. Indeed, he secretly hoped the issue would speedily be decided thus, although he would not have done a treacherous act to assist to this end for his right arm, for the colonel, in his way of thinking, was a man of the strictest honor. Montague was a widower, having lost his wife in the early stages of the war. His plantation was in charge of an overseer, but his daughter Alice, an only child, resided for the present with her uncle, Judge Simons, at whose house we have seen her. In this daughter were bound up the affections of the father. He fairly worshipped her, and was indulgent beyond belief. Her wish was almost law to him, and his late parting had revived and renewed all his attachments for her. So he was now in a proper mood to open and read the little note that Alice had slipped into his hand. It was seldom that he refused a request of his daughter, and it was not likely that he would now, should the note contain one, which he had no doubt it did. He therefore drew forth the slip, and was on the point of opening it when he hesitated. Then he kissed the note, and said to himself, "My dearest Alice, your request shall be granted for your own and your mother's sake, no matter what it may be." He then opened the note and read it. In an instant his brow grew dark, and his eyes were lit up with strange gleam, and he drew his breath heavily. Then he crushed the note in his powerful hand and plunged his spurs into the side of his horse. He galloped on more furiously than ever. The men wondered, but said nothing, and rode rapidly to keep up with their leader. It was evident that the contents of the note had made a powerful impression upon the colonel, and had greatly excited him. The note ran thus: "Dear, kind father, you say the young officer you are pursuing is a Union man, and that he is the son of our old enemy, Saint Leger. I entreat you to spare his life if you capture him. Let the bitter feud that has existed between the families cease, I pray you. It is a woman's province to heal quarrels. Let it be my mission now. Affectionately, Alice." No wonder that the fiery Southerner was excited upon reading this note, a note from his only daughter, asking for the life of his bitter, sworn enemy. An hour before, he had thought in his own mind that the time had arrived when, at one blow, he might blot out the only survivor of the hated Saint Leger family, and thus secure peace and quiet for himself and his. But now he had vowed to grant his daughter's request, and that forbade the execution of his cherished plan. There was a severe tumult of feeling and a struggle in his breast for a time, and then he drew rein and rode more leisurely, for he had decided to spare the young man's life should he be caught. More even than that, for when once he looked at the matter calmly, he saw the unreasonableness of the feud that existed, and he even went so far as to form a partial determination that he would propose conciliatory terms to young George St. Leger. Were it not better thus? The St. Legers had begun the quarrel, and bitterly had they suffered therefore. If, therefore, the youth were disposed, he would strive to reconcile him, and try for once the power of kindness. If then his offers were spurned, upon the young man's head would fall the blame. The party had ridden a half-dozen miles, and the bright sun was mounting well up in the sky. They had as yet seen no signs of the fugitive, and began to doubt whether either of the other squads would succeed in cutting him off. They now drew rein at a small stream to let their beasts drink, and recover their breath for a moment. Before them lay a strip of pine wood through which the road ran. Suddenly, the sharp report of a pistol was heard from the woods, and a confused noise, as of many voices in the distance. End chapter 8. Chapter 9 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gary Conover, Windham, Maine. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren, Chapter 9. Old Ben appropriates a breakfast. Gets poisoned. Old Ben Manx soon discovered that he was not pursued by Colonel Montague and his party. So he stopped his headlong career and brought up with a sudden jerk that would have tumbled a less skillful horseman from his saddle. Colonel, snickered the old fellow. That wasn't such a unlucky blow you guv me after all. Hurt a bit, I allow, for this pack on my back ain't quite as hard as a stone. But considering the good act that thou has come of it, we'll call it square, I reckon. Mighty glad the Colonel didn't chase me, 'cause this old nag what's under me ain't calculated for a long-winded course. Not but that the old critter could stand it, but then it would be a little tough on me. Trot's thundering hard, and my old bones ain't glued together as tight as they used to be. A valuable critter, to be sure, for certain purposes, among which ain't riding, I'm sure. Bones too nigh the surface and ridgepole a little too sharp for comfort. And now, what's to be did? Old Haskins was waiting at the tavern to give me particular fits. When I comes back and light's not, that old gossip will squeeze my windpipe a trifle, if he had a chance. Shan't give neither one of them vagabonds a chance to wreak their vengeance on an innocent individual like myself. And now I see that the Colonel's party has gone up to the judge's mansion. They are after George beyond all manner of doubt, dang it. It ain't a fair shake at all. There must be a whole army of the Rebs a-riding and racing and prancing over this here district, and all after poor George. That's mean. It's doggone cowardly. Blow me if I'll stand it. I ain't much to brag of in the way of strength or courage, but then I'm better than nobody if you don't count in the knapsack on my back. I have a keen eye and a long-legged nag and a pair of pistols, and what's to hinder me from doing a good turn for George? He were kind to me once, and kindness goes a long way with old Ben Manx. Now, the Colonel and his chap will stay an hour or such up to the house, and that'll give me a chance to get a bully start on 'em anyhow. Ain't certain that I can catch up to George, but if I don't, why, maybe I can still find something to do to help the boy. I'll try, and trust to Providence. So Ben turned his nag down the road and moved slowly and stealthily along until he was fairly past the mansion of the judge. Then, feeling secure, he gave his nag a sharp cut across the shoulders and covered the ground at a rapid rate. Ben rode for an hour at quite a steady gait, daylight meantime breaking, and the sun rising. He was not positive that he was on the right track exactly, but as the road had no forks tending to the south, he concluded that, of course, George had pursued the main road leading towards Beaufort. This here exercise are supposed to be conducive to health, said Ben as he journeyed along, and are a grand thing to get up an appetite. Stars, but I'm getting hungry as a black bear. Trouble, howsomever, with me, never were want an appetite. Trouble always was to get something to eat. Things ain't divided equally in this world, anyhow. Here's a rich chap that has his bantry and barns full of the fat of the land, but the old fellow hain't the appetite of a musketeer. He has sucked himself chock full of blood, and here on the other hand is me, but always a dying for something to eat, and nary enough kin I can get scarcely to keep soul and body together. Now, it seems to me that either the rich man ought to have my appetite, or else I ought to have his victuals and drink. Either way would fill the bill, but I think the latter style would suit me the best. In a few minutes, Ben approached a small, rough-looking house, standing a little back from the road. It was evidently the home of persons in the lower walks of life. Still, the house was occupied, for a window was open, and a bit of green curtain hung on the inner side. Ben concluded to stop a moment. "Reckon they ain't so poor, but they'd give a fella a bit of corn dodger. This fastin' are a mighty poor business. 'Tain't conducive neither to health nor comfort." Ben dismounted and tied his horse to the fence and entered the yard. He rapped at the door twice, but obtained no response. "They ain't enough politeness to hurt 'em, I reckon. Certain they won't die of it. Maybe they ain't to the house. Window open. Hey, I'll peek in." Ben thrust his head cautiously within. He took in the contents of the cabin at a glance. It was a moderate-sized room and plainly furnished. It was, moreover, the kitchen, and in one corner was the fireplace. A fire was burning upon the hearth, well burnt down to coals, while a piece of pork was sputtering away at a great rate upon an old-fashioned gridiron. A griddle was lying nearby, and a small bowl of butter ready for the corn cakes. The owner of the premises evidently was not far off. A delicious, savory odor permeated the apartment, and as the smell of the boiling pork reached Ben's olfactory nerves, he smacked his lips and said, "Dang it, that's a tempting mess they're cooking in there. Wonder who runs this here hotel. I'll try the back door. Bound to have a bite." Ben tried the back door, no response. He then made a circuit of the house, but with no success. Not a soul was in sight. "This are certainly a wery aggravating state of affairs. If the boss of this ranch were at home, I make no manner of doubt that he'd invite me in to partake of that pork and them cakes. Wonder where in thunder he's gone to. 'Tain't businesslike to go off and leave a man's premises in such an unprotected condition. Supposing I was a thief, which I ain't, I might carry off the whole concern, and nobody be the wiser. Let's take another look at the window." The old chap now walked up and put his head inside of the window. He snuffed the air in a highly gratifying manner. Suddenly he scratched his head and seemed puzzled over something. "Now, what's to be did? Things is approaching a crisis. This pork steak are well done. In fact, it are actually on the pint of burning. In 2 minutes more, there'll be nary a steak there. Nothing except a piece of burnt meat, as black and crisp as the sole of my old boot. Shall I stand by and see the pork spiled in the way, and not raise a hand to prevent it? Would that be a Christian act? Would that be a practicing the golden rule? Do to others as you'd have 'em another do to yourself? Supposing now I were to be in the pint of burning up, and that pork steak had the power to prevent it, and didn't I prevent it, wouldn't it be responsible for my burning up? Certain. And now if I stand by and see the steak burn up, gosh, the meat's a-smoking now. Here goes. It are an act of charity to the man what owns the pork." Through the window scrambled the old man, and in the twinkling of an eye the pork steak was rescued from the fire and deposited on a yellow earthenware dish. Ben eyed it a moment, then he said, "There's no doubt that since I saved the bacon belongs to me. I'm hungry, and the steak ought to be eat before it gets cold. Cold pork ain't nigh so good as warm pork. What's the use of waiting? Here I have waited for the landlord of this hotel to come to breakfast for nigh 15 minutes, and he ain't come, nor ain't to be seed nowhere, and ain't sent no word when he are coming. Turnabout all is fair play, and fair play is a jewel. Having waited on him, while I'll just wait in myself a bit. Always did like warm pork, and don't object to griddle cakes. Pork allers better with cakes." Ben ceased talking. He went to work. He stuffed his mouth with rich, juicy pork, then began to bake cakes. Ben was proficient, not only in eating, but in cooking. And so between the pork steak and the corn cakes, the old fellow made a hearty meal. Seems to me that we're very kind of the man that owns this place to provide me with a good meal. If I have to travel again, I think I'll take this road about as well as any. Accommodations are tip-top, and for all I can see, the charges ain't going to be very extortionate either. Ben was in a very good humor. In fact, most men in health find their animal spirits inclined to be jubilant after a good meal. And when the meal costs them nothing, that is only an additional reason for feeling good. But eating a meal without anything to drink is rather dry work. So at least old Ben concluded, for he soon stretched himself and soliloquized, "That pork has made me dreadful thirsty. Wonder if the landlord has a bar in connection with this hotel. Let's see. Old Haskin keeps his best always in the pantry. I'll just snook around a little, and then I must be up and off. Hello, what's that?" Ben ran to the window and looked out. Dang it, the old nag has broke loose. Well, she are getting hungry. She won't struggle far, for she is already nibbling over there at the edge of the woods. I'll hit up something to clear up my throat, and then I'll be a-moving. Ben searched assiduously for some time, but without much success. At last he espied several bottles up on the upper shelf. Did not take long to haul them down. Bully luck, this big black bottle looks suspicious, though. What's its label? Dang it, I can't make it out. Let's see. VINEGAR. What in thunder does that spell? It are ahead of my learning. Tain't poison, anyway. 'Cause that begins with a P. I'll try it. Smells like liquor. Ben turned up the bottle and took a swallow. He spat it out with disgust. Now I know what that pesky word on the label are. It is vinegar, and mighty mean at that. Ben took down another bottle. It also had a label. He held it up. This begins with an O, so 'tain't poison. Ain't afraid of nothing except poison. Ben took a nip, but blew the contents out of his mouth with a wry face. By hokey. Young castor oil. I'll try one more and quit, said Ben as he took up a third bottle and without looking at the label took a swig. Gosh, but it's hot. What can it be? He looked at the label. It began with the letter P. Ben was horrified. P stood in his vocabulary for poison. Oh, I'm done for now, he groaned. Poison for sartin, and what's that? He ran to the window and looked out. A dozen rebel dragoons were at the door. Oh, dear. Between the poison and the rebels, I'm done for, sartin. What'll I do? Oh, my innards, there's a fire. Ben had no time to reflect. He preferred to risk the poison, and bolting through a side door, he found himself in a bedroom, and in a second he was under the bed. End chapter 9. Chapter 10 of The Northern Spy. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gary Conover, Windham, Maine. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren, Chapter 10. Ben discovers very unpleasant things. The room in which old Ben had secreted himself was separated from the kitchen by a thin board partition. This partition had been originally built of green lumber, which, as the seasoning process went on, contracted, leaving formidable cracks between the boards. These openings had been covered up with long strips of newspapers pasted over them. As soon as Ben recovered his breath and had time to look about him, he became aware of the fact we have just stated. Now then, quoth he to himself, if them fellers will keep out of here, I reckon I can punch a hole through this strip of paper at the foot of the bed and see what they is up to. Seems to me there must be a whole regiment of them, from the noise and clatter they make. Don't like to hear the rattling of them swords on the floor. 'Tain't agreeable music to my peaceful ears, not half so sweet as the clatter of their horses' hoofs a trotting down the road would be. Wonder who the chaps are and what they are doing. Dang it, if I hadn't drunk that poison, maybe I'd get clear yet. My eyes, how the pesky stuff burns and cramps my insides. I'm tunnel feared that I'll go off the pin suddenly. Think I feel a general sort of contraction of the bowels. Gosh, how it hurts. Who's that talking out there? Ben seemed to hear a familiar voice, and his curiosity exceeded his fears of the poison to such an extent that he apparently forgot the letter, and crept at once to the foot of the bed, listened with his ear to the wall. May I be blowed up with a torpedo if that ain't the strangest thing. 'Pears that it must be the voice of George St. Leger. Yet it can't be possible, for what would he be a-doing here? Tucked prisoner again. My eyes, I wonder what that can be so. Oh, this poison, how it burns. I'm terribly feared that breakfast will prove a mighty expensive one before it gets done with it. By hokey, I must get a squint into that other room somehow. I'm just a-dying with curiosity. Ben now took from his pocket a small jackknife and cut a slit in the paper, applied his eye to the aperture. What he saw startled him so much that he drew back suddenly, hitting his head a severe bump against the end rail of the bedstead. That brought a grunt of pain from his lips. Purty darn sharp edge on that rail. Don't see why that fellow that made it couldn't have run to the doss, sorta. Oh my, that's just as I expected. There's George out there in the hands of them wagabonds. He don't seem much scared, though. Wonder what's come of the documents. Hope the Rebs won't get a hold of them, for if they do, I expect it'll be proof enough to hang him. Dressed in rebel unicorn and suspicious papers on his person, it looks bad, mighty bad, I tell you. Ben was correct, for in the other room was George St. Leger, a prisoner in the hands of half a score of rebel cavalry. A few words will explain how this untoward event came to pass. When George left old Ben Banks an hour before daybreak on that morning, he felt that if he was to reach his destination, or in other words, to get to Beaufort, he would have to ride vigorously for it, and so he spared neither spur nor whip in the endeavor to place as much ground between himself and the cavalry of Montague as possible. For he had learned from the lips of old Manx that he was being hotly pursued. In the first hour he rode 9 miles, and was beginning to take courage, for his horse was fresh, comparatively, and was proving himself a good traveler. He congratulated himself too soon, however, for the animal stepped upon a rolling stone and fell heavily upon its knees. The beast rose instantly, however, and started off again, but limped considerably. George drew rein to let the horse walk slowly a piece in hopes it would recover itself. But instead of getting better, the limping increased until, at the edge of a little brook, the horse refused to go further. It was now broad daylight, and the officer dismounted and examined the foot of his beast. It had sprained the ankle joint, which was already swelling rapidly. George at once bathed the leg with cold water, but it did not seem to relieve the horse any. He was now in a dilemma. He could not proceed for any distance on foot, and where was he to obtain another horse? While he was debating in his mind what to do, he heard the sound of horses' feet upon the road. He must conceal himself at once until they passed. It would not do to leave the horse, for that would cause suspicion, and so he tried to lead the animal into the bushes at the roadside. But the horse obstinately refused to go a step. So George left it in the road and ran into a strip of bushes. But he had tarried too long with the horse, and the party of dragoons, catching a glimpse of his retreating form, raised a shout of joy. They were a portion of one of Montague's squads, which had been making a detour to the left and had now swept round into the main road. The horse standing in the road in the act of flying were so suspicious that they concluded the fugitive must be the man they were after. Two of them discharged their pistols, spurred their horses across the stream and into a thicket. But finding the bushes too thick to permit a passage, they turned back to the wood. The others jumped a low fence and ran their horses to the other side of the thicket, only to see the fugitive running at the top of his speed 20 rods ahead of them and beyond the creek. With a volley of curses and a few straggling shots, the rebels set out in pursuit. But the surface of the ground was very uneven and intersected by irregular rows of low, stunted bushes, so that but little headway could be made by horsemen, and in 3 minutes the fugitive was out of sight entirely. All this happened only a short distance from the house where old Ben had taken his breakfast so unceremoniously. George, although he perceived that his pursuers had given up the chase, still hurried on as fast as he could run. He was now skirting along the edge of the woods just in the rear of the farmhouse, and would have no doubt escaped discovery by the cavalry had he not accidentally run foul of a new danger. The owner of the house, a tall, wiry, shaggy-headed fellow wearing a dilapidated and dirty rebel uniform, and who was minus his left arm, which he had lost at Murfreesboro, happened just at that time to be going to the spring at the back of his lot for a pail of water, having mixed up his batter for a cake and put a piece of pork on the griddle to broil at the house. This chap had just filled his pail and was at the point of returning when St. Leger burst from the brush and stood before him. Both men were surprised. The rebel spoke first. "Hello, what's up, that you're running so fast?" "After a blasted Yankee spy," said George, his wits not forsaking him for a second. "He ran down here this way a minute ago. Did you see him?" "Thunder, no." "Was that what the firing was about a bit ago?" "Yes, I shot at him twice, but don't think I hit him." "Are them fellers part of your gang?" asked the rebel as he pointed to 2 dragoons who had ridden across the field toward the house. "Yes," said George with a sudden start. "I must be off. Tell the men to join me at the back of the run where the Yankee left his horse." Without waiting to get a reply, St. Leger bounded off like a deer, and so suddenly, indeed, that somehow or other it seemed suspicious to the one-armed rebel, who at once raised a yell and attracted the attention of the 2 cavalrymen, who rode toward him at full speed, and on hearing the man's story, at once declared that the person he had seen was the fugitive. The one-armed rebel dropped his bucket, and all 3 set out at full speed to catch the Yankee. George saw them coming and ran through the woods for half a mile when he came unexpectedly out upon the highway, and clambered over the fence to find himself in the presence of 4 horsemen who drew their pistols and called upon him to surrender. It were folly to resist longer, and so very unwillingly the captain made a virtue of necessity and surrendered. The men were part of the same squad as his first pursuers, and they bade him mount behind one of them, and they thus rode along until they met the others, when all turned back to the house of the one-armed rebel. And thus it happened that George St. Leger was one of the occupants of the kitchen adjoining the bedroom wherein was concealed the worthy Ben, who trembled alternatively lest the poison should destroy or the rebels discover him in his hiding place. St. Leger still had the dispatches upon his person, retaining them because they had been captured by surprise and had, as yet, no opportunity to dispose of them. If found upon him, he knew they would condemn him, but he had no way of getting rid of them without being seen. So he maintained a bold front and trusted for the best. The one-armed Dick was now set to work to hunt up something to eat for the troopers, who declared that they were ravenously hungry. The rebel demurred, saying that they would eat him out of house, but the troopers were inexorable, and Dick brought out a piece of pork as big as his hand, which he began to cut into slices. The poor fellow was astonished to find his pork and batter gone, and the contents of the black bottle spewed around the floor. But he concluded that it was the work of some of the dragoons who had been there during his absence. All the dragoons but 2 left the room and were outside with their horses. St. Leger, who was left free to sit in the room, was gazing into the fire intently. He walked up and down the room, approaching close to the fire each time. Suddenly he drew from his breast pocket the envelope containing the dispatches and threw it upon the blazing fire. Dick saw the move and comprehended it instantly. He leaped forward and tried to draw the packet from the fire, but St. Leger was on the watch, and catching him by the collar, he hurled him backward across the room. "He's burning up some papers," roared Dick. "Thunder, that's so," cried the other 2 as they ran forward and turned to rescue the papers from the blaze. "Back!" cried St. Leger fiercely. But the rebels didn't back, as he expected them to. On the contrary, both ran the faster. St. Leger seized one by the throat and held him fast. The other slipped and fell on the floor, but struggled to his feet and dashed at the packet. Too late. Only a corner of the envelope remained, whereupon was written the name Hardy. Dick had picked up a pistol, and while debating whether to shoot or not, off went the load, sending the ball through the thin partition within an inch of old Ben's nose, just as he was wondering whether he ought not to sally out and help George. "Dang it, that's close nipping," muttered the old fellow. "I knowed from the fust that the owner of this hotel warn't noted for his politeness. He's an ornery mean chap, he is. Mighty glad them documents are burned up. Smoke won't tell no tales about them secrets. You'll never catch me a-toting around papers. It's dangerous. I'd rather tote this here pack of mine another 50 year. Hello, here they all come, head over heels." Sure enough, the report of the pistol brought the rest of the dragoons into the house in double-quick time. "What's the matter?" demanded Lieutenant Johnson, who commanded the detachment. "Who fired that pistol?" "Me," replied Dick. "What for and whom at?" "Went off accidentally, sir." "Anybody hurt?" "Guess not. This prisoner burned up some document." "Burnt up a document?" "Yes." "Why did you permit him to do so?" The 2 soldiers replied, "Did it too quick. We didn't expect nothing of the kind." "All burnt up?" "All but this here." The lieutenant seized a bit of the envelope. "Got Hardy's name on it." "Yes, sir." "Was it this you destroyed? Was it your dispatch?" "What dispatches, sir?" asked St. Leger calmly. "We are in pursuit of a Yankee messenger. We have arrested you, and answering the description, you had in your possession important papers. Why did you burn them?" "The papers I burnt did not belong to you. They were put in my charge. I have destroyed them." "Then you are a Yankee?" "I'm a native of South Carolina, sir." "The dickens you are. So is the man we are after. And now, sir, give us your name, if you please." "But if I don't please," suggested George, "we will compel you." "Then to save you that trouble, call me Captain Maurice Hoffman, aide on General Hardy's staff." "What? You are not so foolish as to think to deceive us. We happen to know you. You left Sherman's army at Millen. You bore dispatches to Foster at Beaufort, although they were addressed to Beauregard. You see, we know you." St. Leger saw that by some means his true character had been penetrated, and that further attempts to mislead his captors would produce no good. So he answered, "Think it so, if you wish it." "You acted treacherously in destroying your papers. I promised to place them in Foster's hand or to destroy them. I have but kept my promise." "Ah, then you acknowledge yourself a Yankee?" "Call me that if you will. I care nothing." "Then you are a spy, sir." "No, you err. Only a bearer of dispatches." "But you are caught within our lines." "Well?" "And wear our uniform." "Well?" "And have no dispatches." "Well?" "Well? Don't that make you a spy?" "The dispatches have just been destroyed, as you know. I know nothing about it. Your men saw it. I didn't." "Nor do I know they were dispatches. You are a spy. Men, what shall we do with him?" "Spies are hung, generally," said Dick. who smarted under the rough usage he had received at the hands of the stranger. "That's so," responded several. "Sir, I protest," interposed St. Leger with dignity and warmth. "I'm no spy, nor if I were have you the authority to try or punish me. I am your prisoner. Send me to headquarters, there to be properly disposed of. Let my crime, if any I've committed, be there defined, the punishment adjudged and duly executed." "Would you teach me my duty, sir?" "Certainly, if you don't know it already." "You are a bold youth." "Sherman's men are not noted for cowardice, I believe, sir," replied St. Leger with a contemptuous smile. "Impudent, too, eh?" replied Lieutenant Johnson. "Then if you add that vice to your others, by Jove, you'll have to swing, if I can find a rope in the house." "Want a rope? Hey!" cried Dick, the owner of the house, and who had no very warm feelings toward St. Leger. "I ain't but one, and that's the cord of my bedstead. And if the old woman was to hum, I suppose she'd see us all in Texas, for she'd let us use it for such a dirty purpose as to hang a Yankee. But the old gal ain't here, so out comes the bedcord." End Chapter 10.
Chapter 11 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 11. Queer Things Happen. Ben Manx felt a shiver of terror creep over his old bones as he heard this speech. For as he was lying, concealed beneath the bed, there was no hope of longer avoiding detection if the bed was overhauled. His anxiety was heightened as Dick bounded into the small bedroom and seized with energy upon the scanty clothing that lay upon the bedstead. "Now or never," said the old fellow to himself in a desperate tone, as he was exposed to the view of the owner of the house. Ben scrambled out from under the bed, and in so doing upset the worthy Dick, who keeled over backward beneath a huge armful of bedding, striking his head severely against the door of the room, which he had left ajar, and actually stunning him to senselessness. Having struck the door from behind, it closed with a slam, and the next instant Ben leaped through the open window and crouched beneath a quantity of vines that clambered up the side of the house. As he lay here, he heard the noise made by the dragoons in pushing open the door, and their exclamations as they beheld the prostrate form of the worthy Dick. They never suspected that he had been assaulted, but supposed that he had slipped and hurt himself. They soon stripped the rope from the bed, and then returned to the kitchen, dragging Dick's body out with them, and throwing a bucket of water into his face to recover him. But as he did not seem in a hurry to return to consciousness, he was permitted to lie at will upon the floor like a log. Ben Manx could no longer restrain his impatience to see what was going on in the house, for he felt that it was a critical moment for his friend George. So he rose up and peeped into the bedroom. It was vacant, and the door was closed. "Dang it! I'll go in again." And the nimble old fellow swung himself through the window into the bedroom. He then threw the bedding over the foot of the bedstead and crept beneath it into his old position at the crack in the partition. "Now then, we'll see what's what," said he with a chuckle. "Old Ben ain't worth much, hump and all, but dang it, what there is of him is good for a friend in a tight fix. And if George ain't in that predicament, then there's no use of talking. Blame them villains, I really believe they's a-goin' to hang the boy. The audacious scallywags." George St. Leger, thought so too. The rebels had made a noose at one end of the cord and had thrown the other end over a crossbeam above. George was standing beneath the beam with the cord about his neck and his hands and feet tied. 4 stout dragoons had hold of the other end of the rope and were awaiting the sign from Lieutenant Johnston to run him up. The others stood around, enjoying the fun. "This is murder, sir, and an unmitigated outrage upon a Union soldier," said George St. Leger, "and I protest against it." "So do I," muttered old Ben to himself. "But the trouble are that protestin' don't save the boy. Nothin' short o' a dozen o' Yankee cavalry would do the business, and as thar hain't none round this side o' the river, why, blow me, if the jig hain't up with George. And 'spect if I'm ketched, they'd twist this neck o' mine like a stick o' molasses candy. That, howsomever, hain't o' much account, seeing that my time are about run out anyhow. But it are a sort of pity to have a nice feller like George hustled off in a short time, seeing he ain't no pack on his back like me. But then, jest at present, I'm a leetle better off than George are, for I have the free use of my limbs, and that are more than he can say. Dang it, that lieutenant are about to give the sign. What shall I do? Use my pistol? Yes, dang my buttons, if I don't. If I can't save the boy, I'll revenge him. I'll put a bullet through that lieutenant's waistcoat, as sartin as he hangs the boy. Now, do your purtiest. Oh, my!" The sign had been given, and the 4 stout rebels drew up the Union officer with a will. Ben cocked his pistol, and placing the muzzle at the crack, he took a rapid aim and fired. Lieutenant Johnson jumped 2 feet into the air, but he was startled, not by the bullet, but by the report, for old Ben at the last moment had changed his aim, and the ball that was to have pierced the rebel's heart cut in two the cord above George St. Leger's head. Down dropped the young man gently upon his feet. A bombshell would not have created greater confusion in the room than did this shot. "That's all the load I've got," said Ben to himself, "and I'd better get out of hyar ter onset. That's all I can do for you, George. Goodbye, and may the Lord save you now." Ben sprung up and jumped for the window. He tumbled back, however, very unceremoniously on the floor, being assisted by the stout grip of a rebel, who at that second entered the room, saying, "No, you don't, old humpback," then saw the game was up, and very quietly replied, "Just to suit ye. I'll hold on a bit, if you says so." "Ha, ha! Reckon you will," cried the rebel, as he dragged the old fellow out into the other room. The other rebels burst into a fit of laughter at the comical appearance of old Ben, who, however, not at all abashed, cried out, "Do your worst, ye audacious villains! Bad luck to all o' ye, when our sojers hain't nothin' ter do but to prowl about the country a hangin' innocent people. I hope the Lord will send a hump as big as a mountain unter every one o' you'uns. Shame unto ye, ter be a laughin' at my infirmities. 'Tain't a pack o' sins, though. Thank the Lord for that." "Who are you, sirrah?" demanded the lieutenant. "Old Ben," was the reply. "How come you here?" "This villain fotched me." "Call my men villains, eh? Well, why not? If they ain't villains, then thar's no harm done, and if they be, then the truth's told. Say? Well, you say. What are ye hangin' him fer? He's a spy." "Who said so?" "No matter. I know." Ben thought he might afford to stretch the truth a little on the emergency, and so he said, "Then you know more'n the Colonel does." Colonel who? Montague, of course. What do you know of Montague? Seed him 3 hours ago. Where? Back ter Judge Simmons. And he'll be sure ter onset, too, I bet. And he'll have a fight soon, I'll warrant. Fight? With whom? You, sir. He wants this spy took alive. And if you kill him, he'll swing you for it. The sound of hoofs was heard upon the road. Them's Yankees, said Ben sententiously. George St. Leger tried to burst the bonds that bound him, but in vain. Lieutenant Johnson hurried to the window. Gracious, he exclaimed, it's the colonel. Then murmured George St. Leger, my fate is indeed sealed. He'll hang me without mercy. Oh, my father! Oh, my dead brother! Unavenged! Unavenged! Yes, yes, George, whispered old Ben, who had crept up to his side. The jig's up. They'll kill ye sartin. Maybe they'll think the greatest punishment they can inflict on me will be to let me live on, to tote this pack around. Dang it, maybe they'll let me go. If they do, George, what'll I tell the old father for ye? Quick! Tell him I was murdered, but died a man, was the reply. The words had scarcely passed his lips when the door was thrown wide open, and Colonel Montague entered, followed by his troopers. Hold, men! He exclaimed in imperative tones. What does this mean, Lieutenant Johnson? What means this rope and this prisoner bound? Speak, sir. We took the fellow as a spy, and were about to draw his secrets from him. We thought to scare them out of him. It's a pesky lie, interrupted Ben excitedly. Ye were going to hang him, and ye would have done it, if I hadn't cut the rope. Ye know it, ye lying, pesky, lazy rapscallion. Hang him, said the colonel. It is well you did not succeed, or by heavens, your mother would have one son less before an hour. You have exceeded your duty, sir. Thar, thar. D'ye hear that? Roared Ben. Didn't the young officer tell ye were exceeding the law, dang ye? No interruptions, sir, said the colonel. Your case will have our attention soon. Meantime, keep still. Ben shrugged his shoulders at this speech and kept quiet, but listened attentively. And now, Captain St. Leger, continued the colonel, in a calm, dignified tone of voice, we have full information respecting you. A son of South Carolina, you have returned to her soil, a messenger of her enemy, bearing dispatches, the tenor of which are hostile to the welfare of your native state. You are in error, sir, returned George St. Leger, in a cold, icy tone. I am on my native soil as a friend of my state, a messenger of those who would bring back the peace and prosperity of other days. I regard you, sir, and your associates as those who have brought disaster upon the South. You will please deliver to me your dispatches. I have none, sir. Do you mean to deny that you had dispatches? No, sir, I had them. But they are destroyed. How and where? Lately. They have gone up that chimney in smoke. The colonel looked angry for a moment, and then he began pacing the room. Suddenly he stopped and ordered all except the prisoner to leave the room. I would have a word alone with him. Retire, men, and when I wish you I will call. The dragoons left the room at once, and Colonel Montague and George St. Leger stood alone, face to face, the latter defenseless, the former armed. The youth spoke first in a defiant tone, for his young blood was beginning to course fiercely through his veins. What? Would you murder me defenseless, as you did my brother? You are angry, sir, returned the colonel quietly, and you forget that I am a man of honor. If I maimed your father, you should remember that it was in a duel, where my danger was as great as his. But the boy, my brother, him too I destroyed while he was striving for my life. You forget these things. Passion blinds you. Give me a sword or a pistol, and let justice decide between us now on the instant," cried the young man impetuously, carried away by the force of his anger. "No, had I desired your life, all that was necessary was to have let Lieutenant Johnson alone a few moments, and he would have relieved me of all further care in the matter. Your life is in my hands, but I do not want it. I have no quarrel with you, nor would I ever have had one with your family, had they not forced me to it." "You talk strangely. I did not expect this at your hands," replied Saint-Leger in a more moderate tone. "It is because you have been wrongly taught," said the colonel. "I have no ill will against you. Let the feud that has heretofore existed be at an end. To prove that I mean what I say, I will give you a horse, and you may depart to your friends. Go and remember me hereafter rather as a friend than an enemy." For a moment the young man stood as if transfixed. What a different meeting with his sworn enemy from that which he had for years anticipated! And should he forget the past, the vows of revenge, the years he had spent in preparation therefor? And yet how magnanimous the conduct of this enemy, whom he had been taught to despise and hate! And then there floated before his angry vision a sweet face, with pensive eyes and a winning look. And this was the face of Alice Montague, the daughter of the man before him. He turned toward the colonel and extended his hand, saying, "I did not think to do this, but you have broken me down completely. I accept your offer in the spirit you make it. Henceforth, let there be no enmity between us." In 20 minutes, Saint-Leger rode rapidly down the road, mounted upon a horse, and accompanied by the loquacious Ben Manx, who had obtained permission to accompany the young man, and who was determined henceforth to attach his fortunes to Saint-Leger. Colonel Montague watched the two until they disappeared in the distance, when he gave the order to mount, and his party dashed at a smart gallop along the road leading to Augusta, the veteran muttering to himself, "Alice, Alice! Oh, the power of woman's will! How potent your influence for good or ill!" End of Chapter 11. Recording by John Brandon. Chapter 12 of The Northern Spy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Brandon. The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren. Chapter 12. The End of the Whole Matter. The mind of George Saint-Leger was in a whirl as he turned his horse's head toward the savannah. His conscience approved the peace he had made with his enemy, and said that it was magnanimous and noble. But he imagined the fact of his fiery father, when he should learn the fact, and instinctively shrunk from their first encounter. George knew the country well, and pushed toward a ferry of the river, intending to cross and ride toward Savannah City. He knew he should thus pass his old home, but he determined to ride by without a pause, for he had neither time nor humor for a meeting. Besides, he expected to be again over the same section with his comrades in a few weeks at the furthest. So he bowed his head and rode on as fast as his horse could carry him. Old Ben was hard put to it to keep up with George, and, moreover, he rode by no means so good a horse. "Dang it," he growled, "what's the use of being in such a pesky hurry? Thar ain't no rebels arter us, as I knows on. What's got inter the young master to ride so like the old Harry? 'Pears to me, if I had just got out of such a scrape, I'd not look so like a thundercloud. Dang it! I'd take it easy. That are as easy as a feller could. What had a hump on his back as big as a knapsack. Glad 'tain't a pack of sin, though. And now I wonder what this Yankee army of Sherman's looks like. What I'm going to see pretty soon. 'Spect them Yanks be half hoss and half ironclad alligators. Think thar feet'd get tolerable tough, trampin' over the whole creation as they does. Long time since I been ter Savannah. Of course I'm goin' thar, for old Sherman said he were bound to that point, and of course I'm one of the pesky Yanks now. Hee hee ha ha! St. Legier's mind was too busy with other things to pay any attention to old Ben's remarks, and so for 5 miles rode master and man at a rapid gait. Then they stopped suddenly before a pleasant-looking frame mansion, which stood a short distance from the road. A dozen people stood about the door, mostly females. A coffin resting upon 2 chairs was upon the long veranda, and a tall, thin man in black, with a book in his hand, was giving directions to several servants nearby. A terrible fear seized upon George St. Leger, and there was a choking sensation in his throat. He dismounted, tied his horse to a post, and walked up the gravelled path to the mansion. The ceremonies, whatever they were, ceased as he approached, and the man in black turned his eyes upon the stranger. There was a glance of recognition between the 2 men, as the clergyman gave his hand to the young man and said in a gloomy voice, "You have arrived in time to bury your father." Although George St. Leger had expected this, from the moment he drew rein before the mansion, the intelligence thus communicated seemed to overcome him for a moment. Then he requested that the coffin should be opened. He gazed a while upon the features of the dead, then kissed the cold, pallid face, and the lid was closed. Then the ceremony proceeded, and the body was interred upon the estate, the father lying by the side of wife and son. George could not tarry long, for the loss of his dispatches should be communicated immediately to Sherman, and the misfortune remedied. So after requesting the priest to look after matters for a brief time, he remounted his horse and galloped on as furiously as ever, attended by old Ben, who during the entire delay had not opened his lips, but moved about as quietly as if he knew and appreciated the grief of his master. 6 weeks later, the actual invasion of South Carolina has begun. Savannah has been ours for several weeks, and now on the first day of February, 2/3 of Sherman's army are treading the sacred soil of the Palmetto State. George St. Leger is with Slocum's Corps, the gallant old 20th. It has crossed at Sister's Ferry and is now near Robertville. There has been a stampede among the wealthy planters, and some of their dwellings are lighting up the midnight sky with lurid flames. St. Leger, who knew how furious the troops have become since entering Carolina, obtained permission to have small detachments of cavalry stationed at the estates of Judge Simmons, Colonel Montague, and his own. Thus the fury of war has rolled by them harmless. The captain in person accompanied the squad to the residence of the judge, and found the family in great trepidation and much alarmed, which was by no means lessened as they heard the clatter of the Yankee cavalry on the avenue. The squad drew up in front of the mansion, and the venerable judge appeared upon the veranda and said, "Gentlemen, we are defenseless. You will, I trust, respect age and women." "This is Judge Simmons?" said St. Leger. "That is my name." "Then you are the gentleman we want. And what, sir, want you of me?" "To offer you and yours protection." "Sir, do I understand you?" "This squad will remain here to prevent plundering, and to preserve you from injury. Our army will soon move northward. This kindness is unexpected and appreciated. To whom do I owe it? To the Yankee spy whose life you saved a few weeks since. To George St. Leger, sir. And where is he, sir? Before you, dressed in blue now instead of gray. Come in, sir, come in. We will make you welcome. And they did make the captain welcome. For the 2 days that the 20th Corps lingered in the neighborhood waiting the cooperation of the other troops who were still floundering in the swamps below, the gallant captain tarried at the judge's mansion, a welcome guest, and by none more warmly received than by the winning, lovely Alice Montague. Northward swept the tide of conquest. Across the Carolinas marched the invincible legions of the Union, and at last they met their final, glorious and bloodless victory at Raleigh. Peace with her white wings enveloped the land. The armies of the Union were disbanded and returned to their homes. George St. Leger returned to South Carolina and entered upon the possession of his estates, finding himself one of the wealthiest planters in the district, with old Ben Manx as one of his overseers. The colonel is dead, having been killed by the kick of his horse, and his daughter still resides with Judge Simmons. George St. Leger visits the residence of the worthy judge quite frequently, and knowing ones declare it to be their opinion that it will make a match some day soon. And, kind reader, we think so too. End of Chapter 12. Recording by John Brandon. End of The Northern Spy by J. Thomas Warren.